Good evening, everyone, and welcome to DisabilityEd UK's Neurodiversity celebration. This week is Neurodiversity Celebration Week internationally, and at DisabilityEd we decided that we wanted to have an event that celebrated the wonderful neurodivergent talent that we have amongst the education workforce in the UK. My name's Laura McConnell. I'm one of the development team at DisabilityEd, and I am also autistic. I have ADHD and I am dyslexic, so I'm a very proud neurodivergent teacher. My co-host tonight is the lovely Shabs Anam.
Hello.
Shabs, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself before we move on to our first speaker?
Yeah, I will do. So I'm a neurodivergent mama of divergent children, all in different degrees, and I lecture at Leeds Beckett University. I'm a lecturer in primary education, specialising in race and education, but I'm also their inclusion lead. I was a head teacher for a long time and Senko for a lot longer.
Excellent. So both Shabs and I are very proud neurodivergent educators, and we're really excited about our lineup tonight. First of all, I'm going to bring in our first guest of the evening, and it is Ruth Golding. And Ruth is also part of DisabilityEd. She is our fearless leader. So Ruth, I'm just going to leave it to you to speak and tell everybody a little bit more about DisabilityEd.
Yeah, well, thanks, Laura. Absolutely be here tonight. And a bit of a rush from work, but I'm really glad to be here and celebrating neurodiversity. I think if you work in a school, you cannot possibly do anything other than celebrate neurodiversity and all the people who attend the school with neurodivergent brains. It's absolutely fantastic. So in terms of disability ed, it came about 4 years ago. There was a diverse educators conference, and Women Ed and BAME Ed and LGBT Ed were doing slots, and it seemed that there was a missing group from the party, and it was Disability Ed. And of course, education can be a very disabling place for many people in lots of different ways. So Disability Ed, in terms of disabled educators, is sort of covering all of those things that can be disabling, and goes beyond sort of the social model in terms of, we do really consider chronic illness, and we know that particularly with post-COVID symptoms, we will have some people who need our help and support. We support people with learning disabilities, mental health conditions, neurodiversity, obviously, physical disabilities and sensory impairments, and I've got a physical disability that affects my mobility and my dexterity as well. So what we want really is the logo that says positive about disabled people to be really meaningful and to really make people feel welcome in the workplace. So this network is also for school leaders to really understand reasonable adjustments, and not an able-bodied person's definition of reasonable adjustments, but reasonable adjustments from a disabled person's perspective. On top of that, we really want to make people disability aware, with the schools, sort of the general population having about 20%, 22% of people who are disabled, teaching workforce out people probably 0.4%, and there's a big gap between there. But it's also actually, in terms of our students, actually being fully disability aware and not maybe having just done a little bit of SEND training while you're on ITT, but actually being sort of anti-ableist, actively trying to support and improve rights for people who are disabled. Developing CPD and making workplaces really inclusive, and the government has been talking a lot around flexible working, and of course a lot of these things interlink and interweave. So Disability Ed is the ed that covers all of the different intersections as well, and therefore we feel that we have got a seat at the table, and we have got lots to say about how people gain access, have advocacy support, and generally just have that opportunity to really fulfill their potential. even if, as we know with disabled people, our potential might take a little longer to achieve than other people's. So we've got a number of aims, and those aims are around educating people to actively challenge their own biases around disability and their assumptions and how they think about disability, and move people's thinking away from that deficit model to an addition model. We want to raise awareness that actually disabled people in the workplace do feel stigmatized at times, and they do feel marginalized, and access does feel tough and does make you physically feel that in sensations as well. We want to make sure that all schools are getting leaders that can actively advocate for disabled people and ensure that they receive the supports, the reasonable adjustments, the guidance that they need. And we want to publicise as much as we can for disabled people and disabled educators, the strengths and talents that people bring to a workforce. Having a disabled member of staff should bring so much knowledge around inclusion, around reasonable adjustment, around learning about everybody's individual needs and seeing people uniquely, and actually teaching and learning in terms of how you engage every learner in the classroom. And we also want to collaborate with as many networks as we can to keep giving out the message around disabled educators and what we want and what we want to for representation. So in terms of disability ed, we've got Liz Wright, who's our ambassador. And of course, we've got Laura and Shabs, who've joined the development group and have been such brilliant advocates and enablers for the group to really move forward. And then Vivian Porritt, who brings her guidance and wisdom around having developed a network in Women Ed, and going forward, being able to sort of guide us and offer some support there. And of course, we really look out for disability champions, people who will go and champion in their schools, but also allies for us to sort of have people who are actively thinking about a disability on a regular basis as well. It's tough at times, and I know COVID for many disabled people has been an incredibly interrupted year, and we are just right now to sort of look at and really think about new ways of doing things. The opportunities we've had in terms of online events, and I know that when you're disabled, sometimes you don't feel like traveling at a weekend, but actually being able to do a course or a workshop or talk to people or network from your own home is really incredible, and has given us a new way of learning. So that is Disability Ed in a nutshell. If you would like to become a champion, if you'd like to write a blog, if you'd like to talk at any of our events, please get in touch, and please follow us on Twitter.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you very much for explaining Disability Ed to everyone. And
that's great. Thank you very much, Ruth. That was a
Yeah, we're so happy to have you here with us this evening. Just for everybody else in the audience, so that you know, tonight, if you want to add comments or you want to ask questions of any to YouTube, you can do that. And I think some of you might have seen me flash up Gareth's question or comment, sorry, from before. I can press this button and your question can come up so that everyone in the audience as well as our speakers can see. So thank you so much, Ruth, for speaking to us this evening. Next up, we have Fergus Murray, and I'll just bring you in, Fergus. Hi, Fergus, how are you this evening? I think you're on mute, actually, Fergus.
Yeah, I'm okay, thanks. Yeah. Nice to
Brilliant.
be here.
It's great for to have you with us, Fergus. I've heard speak a number of times at different events, and in fact only this week we were speaking at something earlier in the Scottish Parliament together, so I'm really pleased that Fergus can join us. He's an absolute wealth of information on neurodiversity and on his topic, so we'll leave you, Fergus, and let you.
So, hi, I'm Fergus Murray. I'm a science teacher and writer based in Edinburgh. I'm also the current chair of Autistic Mutual Aid Society Edinburgh, AMAZE, and I do a bit of work with the University of Edinburgh around autism and neurodiversity research, including working on the Learning About Neurodiversity at School project, LEANS, which is developing and piloting materials to teach primary school age kids about neurodiversity, which is perhaps partly a little bit of a backdoor to making teachers understand about it themselves, but it's also very important for pupils to understand neurodiversity for reasons which I'll talk about a bit later. So I want to talk about what neurodiversity is, why it's an important idea in education in particular for kids and teachers, and how I think we might be able to build on this in future. So what is neurodiversity? This is the definition that the LEANS project settled on. Neurodiversity means that we are all different in how we think, feel, and learn, because our brains process information differently. Neurodiversity includes people with a diagnosis, like autism or dyslexia, but it also includes people who are different but have no labels, and neurotypical people. So there are a lot of subtle points in there that I think are worth digging into a bit. One which I think it sometimes gets missed out is that all people collectively are neurodiverse. Neurodiversity describes the cognitive diversity of the human species at large. And that's important because there's actually a huge amount of variation in the way that people think and experience the world, even if we only look at those who would never attract a label for their neurotype, other than the very loose term neurotypical. Some people picture things all the time. Some people have a constantly running internal monologue. Other people don't do either of those things. People's senses are tuned differently. There's a lot of different ways that people experience the world, and that's something that I think everyone benefits from thinking about in terms of their own experiences of the world and how other people might see things differently. Why things that might seem obvious to them are not going to be obvious to other people. So I'm particularly focused on neurodiversity in schools, partly because I am a science teacher myself. I work with a very neurodiverse population of kids spread between 2 different schools. And I'm very aware of the barriers to educational inclusion that come from the misunderstandings associated with being neurodivergent. And I'm very conscious as a neurodivergent teacher that my experience of school and my colleagues' experience of working with me and my kids' experience of being taught by me are shaped to some extent by the fact that I am autistic. I have a relatively unusual neurotype, with all the strengths and weaknesses and weirdnesses that come with that. I think I mask relatively well, which is to say that I maintain a level of apparent weirdness which is appropriate to a science teacher, which gives me I think a fair bit of leeway. But I face real challenges at work, in some respects. My executive functioning can be a major barrier to, for example, getting paperwork done, and anyone who knows any teachers knows that there is a lot of paperwork involved. Sometimes I don't understand my kids' perspectives. I mean, that's true of every teacher, right? But I'm probably somewhat more prone to not understanding my neurotypical kids than most teachers would be to understanding their neurotypical kids, if that makes sense. But I tend to find it easy to get on the same level as autistic kids and to some extent other neurodivergent kids, to understand, you know, what makes their school life difficult, and what can be done to make it easier, and you know how to explain things in a way that works for literal-minded kids who might not be able to process more than one thing at a time, who might need things in different formats, you know, written, spoken, drawn. I think coming from a neurodivergent perspective inherently gives teachers a head start in understanding how differently their kids think. And as I say, people really do just think very differently. Like, the human species is extremely cognitively diverse. And even if we somehow never met anyone who was autistic or dyslexic or had ADHD or was dyspraxic, then understanding how differently different kids are going to understand things and experience things and express themselves is still an extremely valuable skill for any teacher. So everyone involved in schools should understand about neurodiversity, and the fact that most teachers really still don't, and most school administrators, managers, head teachers, the people in charge of hiring, don't come at things from that perspective, means that there are huge barriers to autistic teachers entering and staying in the profession. I personally cannot work full-time with large classes. It just takes too much out of me. I've tried working on a just about part-time timetable, just about full-time timetable, and you know, I get burned out. I cannot master that amount of social nuance for that many hours a day, every day of the week. And in particular, I find very big classes very difficult to manage, and some schools are full of big classes. I'm very lucky now to get to teach only small classes where I can get to know each of the kids and their needs, and the classroom's never going to be an overwhelmingly noisy environment. It's easy to manage the level of distractions, and myself as a monotropic person, you know, someone whose processing resources tend to be focused in one place at a time, I don't have to try and manage what 30 odd kids are doing at a time, particularly around potentially hazardous chemicals, because I'm mostly a chemistry teacher, which again comes with its own challenges. So understanding neurodiversity makes educational inclusion feasible, and having a neurodiverse teaching force makes it likely. Without neurodivergent teachers to provide role models and to make sure there is somebody at the school who understands their perspectives, neurodivergent kids are left kind of adrift. without seeing that there are adults who are different in some of the same ways as them, who deal okay with life and are doing all right, and can provide, you know, understanding and answers to their questions sometimes about what it means to be neurodivergent, to be different from your peers. So I dream of a future where neurodiversity is taken as read, and we don't deal with this 30-odd% of the school population, which we have in Scotland now, with identified additional support needs, as if those are additional. Like, where if it's 30% of kids are not having their needs met by default in our schools, their needs aren't really additional, are they? They're just there. Like, all of the kids have needs, and we are not meeting the needs of a significant fraction of those kids. So kids are bullied, they're misunderstood by teachers, and actually that's an aspect of neurodivergent school experiences that I don't think we talk about enough, which is that a lot of kids feel very bullied by teachers, very misunderstood, attacked. They're seen as lazy, stupid sometimes, troublemakers, difficult kids. And I'd like to hope that if there was more neurodiversity within the teaching workforce, more expectation of the kind of accommodations that neurodivergent and other disabled teachers need, then that level of understanding would sort of organically spread through the teaching population. Maybe that's a lot to hope for. I don't know. But we need to talk about how to achieve this. My hope is that the LEANS project, Learning About Neurodiversity at School, will be taken up widely by schools. Neurodiversity Celebration Week obviously brings ideas about neurodiversity to the school in a very constructive way. But we also need to build these things in at an institutional level. So I was very pleased to see the General Teaching Council of Scotland produce a series of professional guides on neurodiversity, autism, and dyslexia. I had some input into the neurodiversity one, which I think is a very useful document for any teacher. You know, if you want to introduce your colleagues to what neurodiversity is, please send it to them. It's nice that it's got that institutional stamp of approval from the General Teaching Council. And the one on autism is really very good as well. Lots of very sensible suggestions. We also need to be building in neurodiversity education to initial teacher education in every university. We've got some way towards ensuring that all new teachers in Scotland have a section about autism in their teacher training, which is progress. But again, it doesn't make that much sense to look at autism in isolation. I think we really need to be talking about neurodiversity and what it means more broadly. Because apart from anything, a high proportion of autistic kids have other labeled neurodivergence as well. I'm personally waiting for an ADHD diagnosis. More of us are dyslexic than the rest of the population. There's a huge overlap between dyspraxia and autism, both in terms of what the traits are and actual diagnosis. So we can't be just focusing on autism awareness and teaching about autism. We need to be hammering the message that people just do process the world really differently from each other. And then digging down into what that actually means. So what it means to be autistic, what it means to be dyslexic, what it means to be ADHD. There's just so much work to be done. I hope everyone watching this will help to convince whoever is in charge of making sure teachers understand their kids, wherever you are, to move forwards on this, to promote the idea of neurodiversity, to elucidate it, to spread it. So thanks, everyone. Do we have space to take questions here?
Yes, I think Shabs is going to speak to you about some questions. Yeah.
I know there were questions being flashed up, weren't there, Laura? But,
yeah, there was some. So I'll just put it that way. Lena Carter, who's actually speaking with us a little bit later on tonight, said, Fergus, you're an inspiration. And also, I suppose the point again, Gareth, I keep using your point, the point you brought up earlier on about ASD, ADHD and dyslexia being known as a trilogy. That's after I'd said that I'm autistic, I have dyslexia, I have ADHD, I'm a proud neurodivergent individual. As you say, they are very common and overlap, don't they, Fergus?
And it's not always trying to pick apart what's one thing and what's another. Sometimes people say like, oh yeah, that's my ADHD and that's my autism, and I don't know. A lot of the time it's a fool's errand to even try.
It is hard to pick those things apart. I suppose there are certain traits. I suppose, with literacy and with my spelling that I can kind of point and identify towards. That's probably more to do with dyslexia, and then there are other things to do with ADHD, to do with my impulsiveness and impulsive sorts of behaviour that are very closely linked to ADHD. But it's a big executive function blur, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And as I keep hearing people describe ADHD traits, which are also autism traits.
Yeah.
And it's interesting actually how much more obvious that is listening to ADHD and autistic people than it is in reading about either type of difference.
No, I would agree with that. I suppose that there is all of the diagnostic traits that you can go and Google. But I always say when you start off training with anyone that actually anyone can look at those traits and think, oh, I've got this, I've got this, I've got that, and identify with all of them. But when you start talking, as you say, to other people and they start telling you about things in their lives and things that they do, and then there's all of those qualities that aren't on the diagnostic criteria that we all share, that's where there does seem to be the overlap. What do you think, Shabs? And you've also got the parent perspective as well, Shabs.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that until you start to talk to people, it isn't always aware, and I think these intersections are so important for people to kind of explore. I mean, my youngest son, so he is autistic, has ADHD profile, has demand avoidance profile, and there are things that aren't say on those, they're not picked up into being criteria. But I mean, I just think what you were saying there, Fergus, was that I love the of a level of weirdness appropriate to a science teacher. I think that's great. I find that I'm asked enough so that I have a level of weirdness appropriate to this crazy mother of four, and but when I was a head teacher, I had to kind of reel it in, and really dial that back, and it was very difficult. So what you were saying there resonates, and I think it's so important that we do have representation in not just the teaching force, but the leadership force, because without that understanding at a senior level and a governance level, then we're going to struggle, because those things, like you're saying, you know, struggling to have 30 children in your class, or you know, finding it hard to kind of cope with the full-timeness of teaching, I think is something that can only be understood and approached in a creative way, because there are ways of doing that, you know, of supporting all your staff and using the best. I mean, people go on and on about sort of playing to the strengths of your staff. Well, those strengths are there in the neurodivergent community, and you know, but they have to be understood to be pulled out, you know, and equally so that you're not putting that pressure on people, because you really understand that it's, you know, this is the way they are. This is not, you know, you were saying things like people are assuming that people are lazy. It's that it makes me feel so angry every time anybody says that, because it is so common. So, you know, yeah, getting representation further up the chain, I think, is vital, and the work you're doing with kids is amazing, because I think children need to understand, don't they? I mean, you know, again, sort of with my 7-year-old, he's able at times to be able to articulate that, and so that his friends understand, and they're not just, you know, not just putting up with, they understand how he is. And I think the more that we have of that as well, you know, the kids in our schools drive so much, so like you say, it kind of seeps into everything else from them.
No, I absolutely agree. I don't know if you saw that point as well, Fergus, that flashed up something else that I think a lot of people will agree with, that just around the language, it's children with additional needs are not some sort of others. That we all have needs, we all have support needs, I suppose I sometimes call them, as well. That and everyone, neurotypical or not, will have support needs at some point.
It's just that some people get their support needs met by default.
Yes.
They're expected.
Yes. The way that the school system, the way that the school system is structured does meet some people's support needs. Some people's support needs are met through other sort of family structures. It's just that, you know, the addition, having a group of children, I suppose in England, it would be known as SEND, you know, special education and SEND, special education disability, isn't it? And in Scotland, we obviously use ASN, additional support needs. So it is something that I've often thought myself as othering. Thank you so much, Fergus, for being with us. It was an absolute pleasure to have you. If anyone wants to make any points about what Fergus has said, please continue to put them in the side and I'll flash them up. I've just seen one come in from Ruth there. Fergus, I'll let you see it before you go. Individual needs, knowing everyone. Absolutely agree. Thank you again so much for coming this evening. Our next speaker, we've got coming all the way from, I think it's Glasgow tonight that you're in, is Claire Doherty. You are in Glasgow, aren't you, Claire?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so we're crossing the United Kingdom map. We've had Ruth down in Plymouth, Fergus in Edinburgh, and now we're across to Glasgow, and we're going all over the UK tonight. So, Claire, I'll let you introduce yourself, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you tonight.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Doherty, and I'm being 10% braver today, and coming on to talk to you about my experiences as a dyslexic teacher. So to begin with, a little bit about me. I've been teaching for over 20 years now, and I was teaching in England down south, and now I teach in Glasgow in an additional support needs school. So when I started thinking about this presentation and what I could do to talk about my experiences, I had to go back to my schooling. And you know, it was really quite hard to begin with, because I was like, oh my goodness. So basically, when I was at school, I developed some really good avoidance techniques. I could tell you all about the school toilets. In fact, I could give you a full analysis of school toilets in England. However, those were my avoidance techniques. I would make excuses and I would try to leave the classroom as much as possible. And I think we still have students today that do exactly the same thing. My self-esteem, I think, has probably been through the ringer, largely because I think there have been so many points in my state education that I did fail miserably. And there are two experiences that have still stayed with me. And these are the choices that teachers make sometimes. And whatever is the lead thing in teaching at the time. This was my secondary school English teacher. And the new idea at the time was to highlight in the column if you had made a mistake in the sentence. So you'd just have a little asterisk, and then I would have to spot myself as the student, the spelling, punctuation or grammar mistake. To this day now, I still cannot work out how I would even begin to do that and how I even coped with that in the classroom, to be honest with you. I'd ask for support and I'd get the usual response, you're supposed to know, these are things that you have to do. And unfortunately, that help never came. My second one was my careers teacher. Now, my grades are not very good. It's not going very, very well for me. And I'm sat there and he goes, so what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I want to go to university. I want to be the first person in my family to go to university. No idea what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be. But in my head, I needed to go there because I felt that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the best version of myself. And I felt that that was the route for me. He basically laughed me out of the interview. And it was really probably one of the worst experiences that I've had. However, which brings me on to a strength of dyslexia. We're really determined people. And although my grades at the time were not what people expected, however, my determination to improve myself and to become better led me to teaching. In fact, it was these experiences in school that actually drove me to become a teacher at the time. I mean, I can tell you how to misbehave at school. I can tell you all the tricks. But I can also tell you the fear as a student in the classroom. And believe me, that fear is really real. And I still see that in the classroom today. Students genuinely scared about getting something wrong and genuinely scared about the whole learning process. And I pride myself on making a classroom full of mistakes because, hey, I'm the leader and I make a hell of a lot of mistakes in the classroom. And I think that is also really, really important. And the other thing that stays with me is the hours sometimes that I'd spend on an assignment, but then to be told that I'd only spent 5 minutes on it, which simply just isn't true. Which then led me to thinking about disclosure. And I still question whether I should disclose my dyslexia on an application form. However, in the classroom, I'm talking constantly about being dyslexic and what that means, strategies that I use, and how that difference is really, really important. And I even tell my employers once I'm in the door and they see that I'm good, but that might be my own, fears instead. But I do think there's still a lot of discrimination that's out there, and I'm not sure it's always celebrated that you do have a disability. So, in terms of the classroom, I think my first few years of teaching, writing on the board was my biggest fear in case I got a spelling mistake wrong or something like that. And I would turn that into a game and make it part of the teaching. So if a student could spot that I had made a mistake, then they would come up and correct it. And then that would be an opportunity for everyone else in the classroom. However, I'd never, ever leave my writing on the board when I left the room because I was really scared of being found out that I wasn't the perfect model of a teacher that society seems to expect from us. And we're supposed to be, perfect spellers, perfect at everything. And I don't think we always really celebrate that difference. I also love teaching teenagers. They are the most honest and most wonderful group of people you will ever have the privilege to meet. And I have had the privilege to teach some wonderful teenagers. However, they do challenge you and they do, bring you give you lots of things to think about at different times. However, what my point is with teaching teenagers, I've had students, when I've said that I was dyslexic, start leaping for joy in the classroom because, oh, hang on a minute, you're like me and you're successful, and you mean I can really aim high for things, which has been really truly wonderful to observe. And then equally, if I had the teenager going, are you sure you're able to teach me? Are you sure you can? Because, you know, being dyslexic, aren't you stupid? So we still have today, or we need to challenge those narratives. And I'm sad that still today I'm challenging those narratives as well. And I also think meeting the needs of our students, we're probably better at that. However, and that's a very, very big however, I don't think we're good enough at it yet. And I think I was asked the other day, I was thinking about all these famous dyslexics, and I could Google them and I could come up with these amazing people that I could see and look what I could achieve. However, someone said to me, dyslexia is out there now, so we don't need to do anything anymore. And I would argue that society's got a really long, long way to go. I've never been offered any reasonable adjustments. And I think in teaching as a whole, you're very much expected to get on with it. And I think some probationers and things like that could probably explain, express some of their experiences of learning to teach as well. You're expected to just, pull your socks up, and get on with it. I'm expected to meet deadlines such as report writing. And I think my time in England, I probably would have been met with conversations of capability of being able to do my job if I hadn't met those deadlines. I've faced judgments from colleagues. How can you be a teacher? I've found a proofreader in most schools that I've worked. That hasn't been part of their job, and a proofreader has never been offered. They've just been really kind in order to help me. I'm very aware that my processing speed takes longer, and I can equally take a long time to read. However, I've come across people in education that say that dyslexia does not exist, and that was just taught badly. And this, for me, just merely highlights the ignorance that still exists within the system. This may be due to a lack of training, or the fact we still have a lot of ableist attitudes that still exist. And there certainly is a distinct lack of celebration of neurodiversity. This could be to do with the assessing system, because, I got a diagnosis, but when I get my diagnosis, we start with what I can't do. And with this in mind, I think it makes navigating this arena so much more challenging, because when we get information on students, we often get, this is what they can't do, and this is what you need to do to help them. However, wouldn't it be great if we actually celebrated those strengths that the students had as well, and actually flip the narrative and change our perception towards those students too? I've had loads of challenging, the obvious ones like spelling, writing on the board, remembering dates, report writing that I've mentioned before. But I have some amazing bank of strategies that I use. These glasses are shiny in here today because they're tinted blue. Because for me, when I look at a white piece of paper, the writing moves. And I found also in teaching that I was coming home with a lot of headaches. And as part of my prescription to have, my glasses, I always make sure they're tinted blue because that's the colour that works for me, which means that I'm a lot faster practitioner in the classroom. I think I'm worse when I'm tired, and this is probably when I make the most of my mistakes. I have a problem with remembering keywords, which is a bit of an issue with specifications and things like that. And what I try to do is make sure that I colour code them. I know it's a bit geeky, but I love it. And then you put those around the room, and each specification section has a colour, and then you have the keyword, and that's saved me hundreds of times in the classroom. And also, I think it's really helped a lot of my students as well. I think remembering children's names is really hard. And what I have to do is work on one class at a time, but I still sometimes make mistakes. But you have seating plans and you can put pictures of the students, and they're really, really supportive. I think marking has always been a really big worry. And I felt the content was more important than the odd spelling mistake. But every time I go to mark, it would take me so much longer because I've been really worried about judgment, basically, or someone pulling me up on that at different points, or fear of getting into trouble. So I do a lot of verbal feedback, which plays to my strengths as well. Reading out loud is a really big skill that I've had to develop. However, I can't be interrupted, otherwise I lose the train of thread. I start stuttering and everything goes really badly wrong for me. So, as I said before, learning environments that celebrate mistakes are the best ones, in my opinion. I also have a lot of strengths. I think I'm a really excellent role model for students. I haven't ever let dyslexia become a barrier to teaching. It certainly means I have a really good understanding of the barriers and challenges and difficulties that our students do experience. I'm super organised, but this has been a technique I've learned over the years. If not, chaos reigns, and I really can't cope, to be honest with you. I do work smarter, so that doesn't cause a major cognitive overload. So with reports, I'll do so many, and then I'll stop, and then I'll do some more and things like that. I'm also really very conscious of my processing time because it differs to other people, and I have to always remember to give myself that time. And there are no hiding places in the classroom. And so I took the opportunity when I was doing this to ask some students that I've taught over the years. I'm still in contact with them now because I've worked with them. Where I lived down in England, people would go away to university and they would come back and then get jobs in the community. So they became my colleagues. And here are some of the words they said, because I always think student voice is so important. And I also wanted to know, did they really realise I was dyslexic or not? Well, half of them didn't notice and it didn't really matter to them. However, this is what some of them said. During my A-levels, you were very matter-of-fact about dyslexia. It was never a burden or a huge weakness. You were also able to laugh about it too. I think it was a really good attitude for pupils to model if they were facing something that impacted their experience in the classroom too. A second person said, in terms of my education, your openness really did highlight the idea that someone can achieve their goal if they really put the effort in. And you were always really open about how to work around obstacles in general life. I saw you as a teacher that didn't just teach me a subject, and academically, to be honest, it didn't make a blind bit of difference. But the way you handled yourself always inspired me and allowed me to see you as a human being that wasn't perfect and was always there to have open conversations with life difficulties. And finally, this lovely young lady is a teacher, and she's brilliant. Working the job I do now, and knowing the impact of dyslexia on some of my colleagues, I can now appreciate the effort it took when marking and things now. But at the time, can't say I noticed, to be honest. The main things I remember about having you as a teacher was how driven you were and pushed us beyond belief and taught outside the box. For example, the evening of philosophy. I think dyslexia made you a more creative teacher because you appreciate that people learn differently and you actively encourage this. And maybe this was due to dyslexia or just your personality or a bit of both. So this got me thinking, I think dyslexia is me and it is my personality. So I think it's very much part of who I am. My current school is an additional support needs school, and I'm really supported by my colleagues, and it's so refreshing. I can't tell you. Not one of them has said, oh, you've got dyslexia, really? And, you get that scared pause and look. None of that has happened. It's very much like, oh, great, you can help us, which has been super. And I also have a really patient head. And I'm going to tell you, revamping the sensory room at the moment. And it's really, really exciting. And I think it's great. However, I go into the head, start launching into this conversation about all my ideas about the sensory room. And then he stops me. He went, hang on, Claire, you're going to have to give me some context. Because my brain and my mouth, the whole thing didn't engage. And I just thought, well, he should know what I'm talking about, shouldn't he? Well, he didn't. And he's the first teacher that's ever done this, which made me think, how many times have I gone in and spoken to a colleague and given them this whole blurb about how really excited I am about something and how I want to do this and this. And they have had politely not said a word and not told me that they didn't quite have the context and therefore needed further clarification. I mean, how refreshing, really. So to sum up, I think I've been on a massive journey in terms of acceptance of difference in myself. I mean, I'm doing a master's now, and this is the first time academically I have really just enjoying the whole experience. I've got a massive backpack of strategies that I need, and I don't call them strategies. These are just things that help me be successful. And I'm really thankful for events like these, really, this evening, that are shining a light on neurodiversity. And I really think there is so much more that needs to be done. And I think, like the chat earlier, is that we do need people in lots of different levels of the education system really shining a light on everything. And flipping those narratives has got to be where we start as well. I'd just like to say thank you for listening. I don't know, have I got a few more minutes? I don't know.
Thank you very much, Claire. So much,
Claire,
so much of what you.
Thank you very much for being so honest.
Thank you.
So much of what you said really resonated with me as a dyslexic teacher. When you were saying about not having things up on the board, one of the things I really don't like is when you're at maybe a staff meeting or a CPD inset day and someone has to scribe, and it's at that moment when all of the words I probably can spell, I suddenly think I can't spell any of these, and it's just a mind blank, and I then use my handwriting as an excuse and say, oh, my handwriting's terrible, I will do anything to get out of writing that in front of other people in case I spell something wrong. And it's really a fear, because in the classroom, generally on the board, I've probably pre-planned the things that I'm going to write, and I'm writing a lot of maybe things repetitively, I suppose, and so usually on the board things are okay, but I don't always want other people to see my writing, just in case that I'm spotted. So that really resonated with me. Is that something you find as well?
Oh, absolutely. You never see me scribe in any group work. In fact, I actively avoid every moment of that. And I normally give someone a really good compliment, so they're happy to do it. Like, you're really good at writing. You should. I love your writing. I just can't.
Yeah, I do the exact same, you know, give someone a compliment or move the materials somewhere else, or move my chair far away from the materials. And I suppose in a way I would like to maybe just be honest about it and say, like, I'm dyslexic and I'm worried I'm going to spell something wrong and it's going to go around the room. But sometimes it is difficult to have those conversations with your colleagues, because you don't want them to think you're making excuses for things, and you don't really want them to.
And I always worry about judgment. You never know what people think of you. I know openly I've had discrimination, and I've had people call me stupid. So there's other people thinking it as well, haven't they? You know, that's where that stems from, probably, in my thinking. Yeah, definitely.
I think what you said as well earlier about hearing from other teaching colleagues, maybe that you didn't think dyslexia existed. I fortunately haven't heard that about dyslexia, maybe about other things, but not about dyslexia from teaching colleagues. However, I don't think that there is necessarily a great in-depth understanding. I think that there's a lot of if you made more effort and you just practiced more, then you'd get better at it. And there isn't an understanding about the issues in our brains that cause
how things you know, absolutely whatever. What you would do like in 5 minutes, I would go on for. I would take a longer time at it. It just, I mean, I do things faster. It's going to have to be super organised to do it. So it looks like I'm doing things ahead of people, but I'm not. I've just spent ages doing things in small blocks, so I make sure that I'm not overwhelming myself.
Ruth's just said there in the chat, if people weren't, showing kind of ableist attitudes, it would be good if dyslexic teachers could scribe, and then it wouldn't be treated with derision if we made mistakes. And that is correct. A lot of people had mentioned also about the tiredness as well, just in that really resonating with them. Well, I think we've lost Shabs. Hopefully she'll come back. Technical issues, but yeah, I think that really resonated with a lot of people, and certainly I'm sure some of our other speakers might talk about that level of tiredness after a school day that they felt before. So thank you so much. It was really wonderful to hear from you tonight, and I was kind of nodding along and smiling at a lot of the things that you said, and I'm sure the audience was. So thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you. 10% break.
10%. Oh, in fact, yes, Lena Carter from Women Ed Scotland. That was one of the first things that she points out. Yes, being 10% braver, but that's definitely what we would like to hear. So thank you so much for being 10% braver with us tonight. Shabs is, in fact, she's just come back in, but I'm just going to add in our next guest, Eliza. You're on mute just before you start to speak. So we've got Eliza Malone, who is going. Where in the country are you?
England, in Hampshire.
You're in Hampshire, so we've gone from Glasgow now down to Hampshire, and Eliza's going to talk to us a little bit more about her experiences as a teacher with ADHD. Oh, that was my fault. So
that's okay. Hello, I'm Eliza Malone, and I'm an English teacher. When I started teaching, I had just come out of lockdown and I'd missed a lot of my training. I'd never taught a full day before, and I was just joining a new school in a city that I had never been to. And it wasn't until the day that I started, I realized I was really scared. And 5 minutes before I was about to teach, I went in to see my head of department and I said, Susie, I'm teaching in 5 minutes and I don't know if I know what I'm doing. And she turned to me and she smiled and she says, well, once you're on the train, you can't get off. So I went for it and I jumped in and I'm having a really good time. But when I was asked to speak here tonight, my first instinct was to politely decline. I've always been really afraid of taking up space, and I really considered saying no. I was thinking I don't even know how to do a talk, but this language and the way I treat myself about taking up space has held me back from so much good. So I decided to get on that train, and once I'm on, there's no getting off, and we will work out how to do a talk as we go. So now I'm here, and I'm going to take up some space to tell you about my experience of being a teacher with ADHD and how I got to this point of being a teacher with ADHD. So hello, I'm glad you're with me. I started teaching very recently. I was in my 3rd year of university and I was having lunch with one of my friends, and we were on a break between 2 Shakespeare classes. And there was a poster on the wall about teaching and someone was talking about it. And I jokingly suggested that we sign up for a laugh, because it was like the last time you could apply, and we decided to do so. We just gave it a go. We signed up for a laugh, and now we're both teachers, so it is quite a long-winded joke. But I'm really enjoying it. When I started placement, I was terrified. Everyone else just seemed to get it, and people were always on time, knew exactly what room we were in. I thought there was some kind of secret manual that I was missing that everyone else had. People had research notes on things that I didn't even know were words yet that we could research. I was really struggling and I couldn't keep up. Learning in school has never really come easy to me. I kind of tumbled through school with the most varied GCSE grades. I was sporadic and disengaged until I was interested. Then I was your most happy to be there and involved student. I never really felt like a smart kid. I'd always hear things like, well, if you really cared, you'd try. Or if you bothered to listen, you could be as good as your brother. Which never really made sense to me because I really did care. I listened so hard that I could hear the electrics in the projector in the classroom. So to be told I wasn't listening was mad to me. I could hear electric, I was listening so hard. All I wanted was to be as smart as my brother. So to hear that if I tried, I could be, I was so shocked. But I wasn't as smart as my brother. And I decided that I couldn't be. I decided I must be wrong about who I am. And I realized quickly that people knew I was the little sister of an exceptional learner. I was accused of not caring. So I decided to stop to pretend I didn't. I got by in classes. I couldn't really shine in many of them, and I excelled in a couple. I remember being about 12, and my teacher said to me, "Can you stay behind after the lesson?" And I was like, okay. And I stayed behind, and she says, "Why do you always ruin my lessons? Do you not like art?" And I was so confused. I was massively confused, and I was confused because I adored her lessons. She was my favorite teacher and I loved art. It was my favorite subject. The issue was I was so excited to be there that I was full of energy and things to say. I realized that the way I was presenting was coming across as someone who didn't care because I cared too much. We talked about this and I had a few detentions, but I explained how I really felt about art. And she was as shocked as I was when she told me that she thought I didn't like art. She was like, and she couldn't understand it. And I explained that I was just really excited to be there. So she then had this conversation with me and we talked about how I felt and she understood. She started letting me do demonstrations and asking me to go get things, which provided stimulation and movement that I wasn't getting before. My ADHD was being suppressed, but now accommodated. I still had more energy than I needed, but my teacher learned that she could channel that energy and it could be a strength. I started to realize too, I reflect on this time with this teacher daily in my own practice as a teacher and just when I realized that I learned differently. It was my first insight into how people can learn differently and still be successful. We need to learn to lean into our needs, and it really helps when we're heard by someone who wants to help. I'm going to jump back to being a trainee teacher when I was talking about that now. And so I am 21 and everyone is way ahead of me in understanding. I'm really good with the kids, but I couldn't keep my head above the water anywhere else. Those thoughts of not trying came back. I really thought about just dropping out. I was like, okay, I'm good with kids, but that's it. I can't do any of the other stuff. But this time, because I had that relationship with the kids and I was really good at that, I decided to fight these thoughts a bit more. I tried learning about my brain. So I decided to look more into my ADHD and to see if it was something that was holding me back. I turned up to my assessment late, of course, after getting lost twice, and said to the doctor, look, I know I have ADHD and I've known that for a long time, but everything is still too hard. I asked for a reassessment and we did a reassessment and I still have ADHD. And he says, he asked me if I ever tried treatment and I hadn't. He taught me about ADHD and I felt this door to a world of knowledge about myself just unlock. Like this knowledge about my own brain was the key to moving forward and so far is the only key that I'm yet to lose. I started to research and I found out that I learnt best when I don't force myself to fit in the way that others do. I'm not someone who can outline an essay 2 hours before a week and be done in a month. I am a coffee-led 8-hour the night before writer, and that's okay. The more I let my ADHD drive, the more I found out what it needed. I found things that worked for me and I tried them out. I stopped losing myself in trying to be someone else. In my first assignment in training, before this reassessment, I just scraped by. I tried picking a topic that I thought other people seemed to be interested in and seemed to be doing too. I went to the library with them. I hate working in libraries. I find them really hard. I sit there and I compare myself to everyone and I think everyone's working harder than me and so I never focus. But I tried going to the library because everyone else was. And I tried to mold myself into a successful, neurotypical version of one of my friends. I wanted to be like my neurotypical peers, but I'm not neurotypical. I'm neurodivergent, and it took me a really long time to learn it, but I can still be successful. ADHD can make it really hard to perform academically in the expected way. It's not a lack of knowledge, it's a struggle retrieving it and directing that focus to the correct thing. We don't have a lack of focus, we just struggle to make it stick where it needs to. The more I learned about this, the more I was able to value my knowledge and direct my focus towards things I cared about, so it was easier to make it stick. I wrote my next assignment on making the classroom ADHD friendly, which I was so interested in. I wrote it all 2 days before the deadline, because it was quite a big assignment. And I cared so much about it. I worked so hard on it, and I really loved writing it. I felt so connected. And I got a first, And I was so shocked in comparison to that first assignment I did, where I tried to be neurotypical, that difference when I decided to indulge in my knowledge about ADHD and use it. I only wrote when I wanted to. I stopped comparing myself to other people, and I started to make the change to classrooms that I lead with now. My classroom now, before anything else, is a safe space for people with ADHD. I want to give them the chance to find out how they learn best before they're 21 and without any confidence. Here are some of the ways that I create that space for my students in my classroom and help them to be themselves. In my classroom, we often have a movement break. Students are often told to sit and focus when they want to move. I found we weren't compromising, so we wanted them to be still and they wanted to move, so we settled on being still. It wasn't a compromise. We weren't meeting them halfway. So what I started putting in place were chances where I would be able to have a movement break for them. So I was accommodating, but also they were meeting my needs of being still when I might need them to. I get to move around so much when I teach because I'm at the front presenting. I should be offering that to my students too. So when I wanted them to be still, I would tell them, can we try and stay in our seats for now, because we'll have a movement break in about 5 minutes. And giving them that time and promising them that movement break means that they can now hear, okay, I'll try my best because I know I'll get to move in 5 minutes. That's when we're meeting them halfway. We're not just wanting something, they want a different thing, so we're going with what we want. And they'll get that accommodation and they can stay in their seat for a bit and then move when they get that break. I also allow my students to doodle. I did see my head teacher pop in, so please don't tell me off for this one. But I do allow them to doodle because I need to focus. And I think the fear around this is the fact that we worry that they will draw in the books and ruin them or not be listening. But as long as we are making sure we give them something to draw on, I think they're fine, and checking in that they can hear us and they're still with us. So I will ask them a couple of questions whilst they're writing, and so they're fine. And I will never confront them if I see them drawing in their book. I'll just put another piece of paper down and say, can we put our doodles on here instead? I don't go in with confrontation or say, why are you doing this to your book? Just lead with suggesting something else that supports them. They might not take you up on it. They might feel like, oh no, it's okay. But a few of them will. And I have a few that always just come in, grab an extra bit of paper now, sit down and start learning and drawing alongside that. And I love seeing that. I talk to kids about what I can do to help them too. I ask them if there's a space in the classroom they feel they learn best. And I give them that seat. And then if I find they've moved to sit near a friend because they've said that works best for them, we'll have a chat about that because they're accountable of their own learning. So I'll say, I'm not sure you are focusing your best there. And often they'll be very honest and say, yeah, that's true, actually. If we trust them to be accountable for their own learning, they do so much better. And I think it gives them that responsibility and shows that we do trust them. We are really diverse learners that need different things, and teaching is such a special opportunity to be able to do that. I struggle, but currently teaching is the most engaging and exciting place for me. I have posters in my classroom about ADHD, and I often share things with the students that I find tricky. There was something recently that I hadn't thought about when we were remote learning. I didn't realise that I would get distracted by things that came up on the screen. And I started reading to the students and I got muddled. I felt really embarrassed and I almost just stopped reading and gave up on the whole thing and pretended it didn't happen. It was really tempting. But I decided I would pause and talk to them about it. I said, Year 9, I'm really sorry about that. I got really muddled when I was reading to you then. And I think I lost a lot of the story for you. What happened was, and I told them about the things that were popping up on my screen. And they know I have ADHD. I talk about it quite often with them. And I was like, I didn't account for these distractions that would come up suddenly. And I'm really sorry. I'll try and read again for you. And I did. And I think what I find is kids are some of the most accepting and understanding people ever. They were so kind. I do work in a very wonderful school, but kids are amazing. And they were just so understanding. Some were like, I struggle to read sometimes anyway without things popping up. Others were like, it's okay, miss. And some were like, I didn't even notice, which was very polite of them. But I felt so much better for having addressed that and talked about it and told them quite honestly that I make mistakes too. I have such a love for teaching at the moment. I think it's so special. And I also think if you're in the right place and you're fortunate and privileged enough to be open about your diagnosis, it can be really, really great and really accommodating, just a great career. I have 30 plus people at any given time who need my attention. I'm never bored. I get to talk about books with the kids all the time. I love books. There are actual bells that go off that tell me when I need to change task. That is so helpful. I really adore showing examples of being an adult with ADHD and working and doing a job I love for the students who haven't seen that before. I hadn't seen it before. Thank you so much for being with me here. And this is a really special opportunity. It's my first time ever doing something like this. And I feel very lucky. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm happy to take some questions if we have any. But thank you for letting me have the space.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Hello.
Thank you very, very much. That was absolutely fantastic. It was so, I mean, yeah, just listening to you, being so courageous about that, but so much that you're saying resonates, you know, and I kind of listening to you saying, getting to 21 and finally listening to your own condition, you know, and finding out about it. I mean, it's taken me to 50. So, you know, I think I just felt so much pride for you really there listening to you. I was getting very emotional. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I noticed a few people I know here, which was really special. I was trying to like keep it together.
I felt so guilty when you said that you when things started popping up on screen, you found that distracting, having just been spending a lot of time popping things up on your screen. So I apologise if that was distracting, but the comments were worth it. This is obviously your head teacher who says you're an absolute credit to the profession. And just right at the start, you talked about when you were asked and you weren't so sure about whether or not you were going to do it. And I've known you for a while now, and you were just, to me, a really obvious choice to ask because you are so passionate about the children and so passionate about making accommodations for children with ADHD and so understanding of them. And your advice to other educators is so good that, to me, you were just an obvious choice. So I hope that, you know, that now you realise that this is something that you can do, and there's all these other people that have so much faith in you. And don't know if this is somebody that you know as well, but
that's my high school English teacher.
Your high school English teacher. So Mr. Stone's very proud of you. And also, you know, your head teachers said, you know, well done. A lot of what you said will resonate with everyone. Sarah, who's up next, I could see her smiling at some of the points that you had said as well. And what I thought was really, I suppose, funny in a way was the way that you got into teaching and how it was that impulsive moment. And I don't think people realise, I recently spoke to some of Shab's students about ADHD and how governed we can sometimes be by our impulses, which can work out well for us. Teaching has worked out well for you. You in that snap moment, seeing a poster on the wall, applied for education, you know, to work in education and look where you are. But sometimes our impulses can have really good outcomes, but sometimes they can have some not so good outcomes. And that's something that I think is really important to understand for those children sitting in front of us. Sometimes they have done something, they've made an action, and you know, they haven't actually realised that they've done it until afterwards, maybe amidst the aftermath. So that was, I really enjoyed hearing that from you and hearing about all your accommodations. A lot of different comments in the chat as well, from other teachers with ADHD and also from students as well. So you may not have got to read them all as they were flashing up and distracting you, but please do have a read of them all as you go through the night. Shabs, I know that you're a parent of children as well, and you're obviously a you work at a university. Great advice for your students, I think.
Fantastic advice. I mean, it's really, I mean, I would love to have you talk to my students, Eliza, because I think you just give them, some of them there who are also, who have ADHD, some kind of, it's that solidarity, that it is possible. And some of the tips that you gave were just fantastic. But again, it's this message we're hearing throughout tonight, that it's not just about children who are neurodiverse, who have ADHD. These are things that should be in place, full stop. They should be there straight away, because it helps everybody. But I think it's singling, yes, we need to acknowledge that we have different needs, but I think that we need to move towards a time where everybody's needs are met. And it's not impossible, it isn't impossible, because it means a better experience for everybody, doesn't it? But I was laughing at your when you were talking about doing your assignment. I mean, I don't think I've ever managed to do it apart from the night. And we talked about this, Laura, didn't we, with my students, that I forced myself every time, and it caused so much stress and anxiety. And obviously, like I said, I didn't know then either. So, I thought, why can't I do this? And listening to you saying, that now when you lean into it, and I've done exactly the same, and I've given up on trying to do it ahead of time because it causes me more stress. So I just know that, look, I will do it at that point when the adrenaline kicks in and my brain is functioning in that space, and I'll do it well. So it was wonderful to hear you say the same thing. I think that's great. Great role model, absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Just exactly the sort of person we need speaking at events like this. Brilliant.
Definitely, and actually that comment did resonate with so many people. Vicky, who also has ADHD, who's in the chat, Vicky Renton, she also said that that she understood that, and I know I certainly did. I was very much, but I think that you giving yourself 8 hours before was, giving yourself quite a lot of time, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Just before we bring on Sarah, one last question there from Ruth. What's the best advice you could give to neurotypical teachers about students with ADHD?
Get to know them and find out how much they know about their condition, and whether they can suggest anything, because they're the ones with the brain, so they probably know what they enjoy, what's hard for them. So just get to know them, give them that chance to talk about how they feel. So find out if they're struggling with different parts, because they might not struggle to stay still. They might struggle to stay in the room or stay doing different things. They have different types of ADHD. And I think if we find out what they're struggling with specifically, that can be really helpful. So have that conversation and do as much research as you can. The more you know, the more you can help.
Absolutely agreed. Thank you so much again for being with us, and I'm so glad that you did agree, because you've been truly wonderful. And go and have a look at all of the nice comments to you in the chat as well. See you later. So next up we have Sarah Boone. Good evening, Sarah.
Good evening. How are you both?
We're good, thank you.
How are you?
Yeah, no, I'm well, thank you.
I'm so glad to have Sarah with us tonight. Sarah, very similarly to me, is a multiply neurodivergent person. Has taught both abroad and also studied psychology, and has a real wealth of experience to share with you this evening. So really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, Sarah.
Thank you, Laura. So hi everyone. So as you know, I'm Sarah. So I am autistic, dyslexic, and ADHD. So a triple threat, as I like to say sometimes. And also, I also say sometimes I'm anything but neurotypical. So in terms of kind of a little bit about me and my background, I've taught English abroad. Initially, that was my first kind of experience in education. Again, that was kind of an impulse decision. I was traveling around the world at the time, after I finished uni, and I met these girls in a hostel. They were like, oh yeah, we did it. It was great. So I was like, great, let's do it. So I signed up for it. because I wasn't ready to come home. And then I actually got my first job in Hong Kong. So then I moved to Hong Kong for a year, taught out there for a year. I then had a massive autistic burnout, so then decided to come back to the UK. And then I worked as a TA in an additional needs school local to me before then doing my psychology masters, which I finished last year. And then since then, I've kind of been doing little bits of various work, because job hunting during a pandemic is definitely not straightforward. So I'm mainly supporting kind of fellow neurodivergent people. So that's normally kind of through mental health, people in higher education, and then also helping facilitate social groups as well. And then I've been also doing a little bit of advisory work for autism projects. So that's kind of a little bit about me and my background. So in terms of when I started working in education, I only knew about my dyslexia. So I was quite young when I got my dyslexia diagnosis. So that's something I've kind of always known about. But I never really felt that comfortable being open about it. I think, sadly, I still felt that stigma. I thought, oh, people are going to perceive me as not capable of doing my job, especially as I was teaching English, and I just think that's just a complete, it's just such a shame, because again, yes, there are certain challenges associated with that, but that doesn't make you a bad teacher. And again, in some ways, I knew how I struggled, or I kind of understood where, I guess, a neurotypical teacher may teach it. That was completely baffling to me. And how I managed to figure it out. So again, that's kind of a real asset you could bring. That kind of stuff comes a little bit more naturally. So again, I was still worried about that stigma though. And I think this is kind of where the executive function comes in as well, because I think obviously being a teacher, multitasking is absolutely a huge part of the job. You're here, you're there, you're checking someone's work, something's going on, you've got all the sensory stuff as well. So I think that kind of the autism comes, influencing that. It could, it could become overwhelming and sometimes make it very difficult to do your job. Not always, but, it did affect my ability to do my job sometimes. I would miss things or not have a good attention to detail. And then my boss would be like, why isn't this marked properly, Sarah? And again, I think looking back, it was just not fully understanding, I guess, my cognitive profile and my neurotype and how that was affecting me at work. So I think that was kind of like a key example there of how reasonable adjustments could have really helped me. I mean, that was very early on. That was like during my first few weeks of teaching. And ways I got around that is I kind of adjusted my lesson plan. So there'd always be some time where students be working could work fairly independently. And then I could, check their work or do other things that I needed to do as well at the same time during the class. It wasn't the perfect solution, because obviously unexpected things happen all the time in the classroom. And, a student could need your support input at any point. But yeah, that was definitely one thing I experienced. But when I did make mistakes, and obviously I didn't really fully understand why, sorry, I should probably say things that were perceived as mistakes, and again, I think this is, again, that time would have been my internalized ableism about it, because I just see, oh, it's my problem, it's the failure of me, I'm just not good at my job, everyone else is. And actually, no, I was just a teacher, who probably just needed some reasonable adjustments. And again, probably just needed some support with playing to my strengths and, figuring that out. And again, kind of now, I think I'd have a very different perspective, nothing I'm ashamed of. It's like, okay, I just need to change it up a bit or get some help. Where at the time I just saw it as like a complete personal failure. So when you know about your neurodivergence, I think it is such a powerful thing. And again, certainly that is the case. Now, kind of what also I experienced as a challenge is something I did actually notice was a theme when I look back working in education, is last minute changes. I guess this is kind of a like autism stereotype about not liking change, but what I found, it kind of, if we dig a little deeper, was I struggled with kind of demands put on my executive function at the last minute. As again, you know, I need a lot more time to process it. Where if it's put on me, boom, gotta do this now, it's like, oh, but I plan to do this thing, this thing, this thing. And then it's like, because again, you know, kind of having multiple neurodivergencies, you know, my executive function is not great compared to a lot of people. So example would be when I was working in Hong Kong, I was working for a language centre that had multiple sites across Hong Kong. And sometimes at quite last minute notice, I'll be told, right, you've got to go to this side of the city, teach there in the morning, come back to where you normally work in the afternoon. And again, you know, they couldn't always predict that that's going to happen. But again, that would have such huge impact on, oh, I've got to change my route. I've got to change what time I get up in the morning. I've got to figure out how am I going to fit my morning routine in. And yeah, because obviously, you know, kind of once you get into that flow, it's nice and easy. So, you know, I definitely kind of did find that challenging. And also as well, like trying to, I know Laura brought up the point about on an inset day, trying not to scribe. I had exactly the same thing. And I was actually honest. And I said that I can't. Or I didn't say I can't, but I said, oh, I'm dyslexic, I'm going to struggle with it. And that was the one time that I was kind of open and transparent about it. And it was like, oh, poor you. And it was like very much, I don't know, people thinking it's a tragedy. I felt very empathized, and it's like, So yeah, the one time I was open, it wasn't awful, but at the same time, it was a bit like, ugh. Because, you know, obviously this person didn't have the kind of best understanding of neurodiversity or kind of, you know, what that would mean for an individual. So, yeah, I think, you know, obviously I know other people would have had more positive experiences, but yeah, so but at the time there was only one occasion where I was open about my dyslexia, and then ADHD and autism never. I didn't know I was an ADHDer for that whole time. It's when I was working in the additional needs schools kind of when I realised that I was autistic. Even though a lot of the students was autistic, it wasn't through my work there. It was kind of doing research outside of work I clicked. But when I did click, then I noticed kind of, I guess, some of how my neurodivergence was similar to the students I was with. And I think that was really interesting because even students who may present quite differently from me or have a different level of support needs, I noticed I could even relate to them on a level. But if I said to that with colleagues, they probably would have looked like I was crazy. So, or, you know, what you're talking about, you're nothing like this person. But because I remember one student got really stressed about, I think we were on a school trip and the other minivan went quite far ahead and they got really stressed about it. And I remember, and the way they responded to it, I was like, I got like that in a child when there were two separate cars of us going to a place. So that was really interesting, kind of looking back on that and being like, I can see this now, and like helping to put the dots together. So, but yeah, I actually look back on that time and I kind of reflect on it really fondly because I felt, you know, even though I wasn't openly out as autistic at school, I think it certainly did help on my journey and kind of seeing my own neurodivergence in myself. So I've talked a lot about the challenges and it probably sounds really negative, but you know, there's so much more to it than, you know, just negative things. And there's certainly, you know, I did have loads of positive experiences. You know, I absolutely, you know, aspects of teaching I absolutely loved. You know, sometimes I was working way too many hours and that was a problem that did lead to burnout. But I think overall, you know, when you're teaching about something you're interested in or you're passionate about, I mean, that's the best, especially, you know, if you're autistic and you're essentially just being paid to talk about your special interest, if that's what you're teaching about for that lesson. So you could just, I mean, it's not ideal to monologue for the whole lesson, but there's that small part of you that could. And, you know, I think especially as well when you have other students that really engage with it because they see how engaged you are, then to be honest, that's just fantastic, and it's just the best feeling in the world. To be honest, I just don't think anything could beat it when you're, you know, that engaged with your students and about ideas. And again, I do think my autism came in there a little bit. So yeah, that was definitely a strength. And I think another strength as well is, I did touch on this a little bit earlier, but again, I found with neurodivergent students, I could some way relate to them and understand them that perhaps neurotypical students struggled with. And one specific example, actually two stand out. So one was of a student that kept on being passed on by teacher by teacher by teacher. You know, they were like, oh, this class is too hard for him, or he's making no progress, he needs to level down. And again, I kind of felt really sorry for this kid, because it just felt like he kept on being passed on. But what I noticed was that the things he was struggling with was, it was constant, you know, when people are going, giving him loads of instructions, he was really struggling. And I remember thinking, oh, I struggle with that, but if I broke the task down one by one, that really helped. So I did that with that student. And again, it made a huge difference in terms of, you know, his work and ability to progress. So again, but I wouldn't have known that at all if it wasn't, you know, for my experiences in education and kind of figuring out, you know, because a lot of the time the way I got through school was, I struggled with the way often teachers taught, but it was me kind of having to sort it out on my, not sort it out on my own, but figuring it out for myself of, okay, how can I learn about this? Because this way that most other people are doing is clearly not working for me. So again, that was a real asset. And then the other time was, I could see that a neurodivergent student was experiencing sensory overload. And I think my expectation probably from other staff members was, do whatever you can to get this child engaged. But I had a real, almost like, I don't know, autistic vibes. I don't know if that's even the right word, but I could just tell, no, like this student, they can't cope with it. They're too much. They won't engage no matter how hard you try. So I just said to the student, are you finding these people and the noise too much? And he looked at me like, yeah. And the way he said it was really interesting. It was almost like, wait, you get it? Because I don't think anyone had acknowledged how hard it was for him to be in that environment at that time, because it was really noisy. It was the end of the day. I think he was already burnt out. So, and by me acknowledging it, and we just sat aside the classroom, we did another activity, and, you know, he was really happy. And my relationship completely changed with that student, as I noticed that he would initiate conversation not anymore. He'd be happy to see me smiling, waving. I know a lot of the things that neurotypicals say that neurodivergent students don't do, enough of, or, oh, they don't say hello and that kind of thing. But what I actually found was, you know, when I was able to connect with him on that level, you know, that I wouldn't say there was really a communication problem. Yes, you know, he communicated quite differently to other people, but in terms of our ability to communicate with each other, just acknowledging that and understanding it made a massive difference in building a trusting relationship. So, and again, that's something I actually don't think I would have been able to achieve as a neurotypical teacher, or perhaps it would have taken a lot longer to get to that, I guess, trusting relationship with that student. But yeah, I think moments like that as well kind of highlight, you know, how amazing working in education can be, and, you know, seeing students progressing and, you know, and I guess ultimately, you know, thriving, and it's just wonderful. So obviously, you know, as I said before, I wasn't openly neurodivergent when I was working in education, but I did notice a few little things looking back now. So in terms of when it came into the classroom, I'd always ask students a few questions. And after a few lessons, one of the students was like, oh, you always ask us the same questions. And I was thinking, isn't that normal? But now I'm like, oh, that was me social scripting in terms of I learned what, you know, teachers would say to greet their students in the classroom. And I was probably modeling it from, you know, my teachers from when I was at school. But because the fact I was using the same phrases and questions every time, because I was essentially using a social script, you know, they picked up on that. I guess it's neurotypical nuance that doesn't come naturally to me. They noticed. And again, I don't think it was perceived as a negative thing, but it was like, yeah, you always do that. So it's weird, like looking back now, I'm like, oh, yes, they probably did notice a few differences. Certainly not all students, but some of them did, and that's quite interesting looking back. But in terms of my colleagues, I think, you know, I know some said they felt it was a little bit harder to get to know me at first, or, you know, once I got to know you, you know, it was great, we had a great relationship, but they said they felt a little bit of a barrier. And I think, you know, a lot of neurodivergent teachers can struggle with, obviously, you know, the small talk in the staff room, or, you know, because again, you kind of go in with that mindset, I'm here to teach, and you maybe not think about all the other stuff or the social side of work that a lot of other people do. Like, it doesn't necessarily come automatically. But yeah, it is interesting that, you know, it did take a little bit maybe longer perhaps to kind of, you know, build friendships with my colleagues, or, you know, kind of outside of work. You know, I remember everyone would used to always go to the pub. Sometimes I'd be too tired, sometimes I would go. And then the times I didn't go, people were like, why aren't you going? Like, it's Friday. But, you know, sometimes I'm like, I'm too burnt out. You know, I've got to almost decompress, build my energy levels back up, and, you know, just completely relax at the weekend. But yeah, I think that's more or less all I've got to say. So yeah, I think if we've got any questions, that'd be great.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really great, and there's probably about, you know, 40 points that you said there that I would love to like address and agree with and things. But actually, something that you said at the end there, which I suppose is really important for a lot of the audience who are watching, would be teachers, would be school leaders, and it's actually really about that social side of teaching. We do focus a lot on the job of teaching and the interaction with the students and like the workload and paperwork, but the social side of teaching, the going to the staff room, the being sociable, going to events and being part of the school community is something that I don't suppose maybe other people who don't have the same maybe social struggles as we do as autistic people appreciate. And dragging yourself along to the staff room or going in nights out can be exhausting, and it means that we're often very tired, which kind of touches on things that we've said earlier on. Is that something that you have experienced all of the time, or did you have any strategies to help you cope with that?
I certainly didn't experience all the time, but a fair amount of the time I did. And usually it would be, I just have to get home as soon as possible after work. Kind of quite often I'd just have to lie in my bed for 2 hours before I could even think about, you know, dinner, stuff I'd have to do in the evening. But I just needed that 2 hours just to almost like breathe, get my energy back. And then the weekend, certainly, you know, most of the time I would need to relax. I think particularly if it's been a challenging week, more so. So yeah, no, I think it is a big thing, and I know, again, a lot of us online talk about autistic burnout, and it is almost, I think that's kind of very linked in terms of, you know, needing to kind of relax after the working day. Well, I guess it's more than relax. It is, you just kind of almost need to be in complete isolation to gain your energy back.
Yeah, we call it a social hangover a lot of the time.
That's it,
yeah, you know, you come in, and I do that, and I'm lucky that my son's now a teenager and allows me to do this. But I come home from work having done a full day in school, and I just need silence for quite a while. I can text and I can message people, but I wouldn't be able to speak to them or talk to them. I need to have that silence, and if I don't, and then it has that knock-on effect, and it would have a knock-on effect the next day in work as well. And I mean, I've come up with kind of strategies in school about working in in my classroom and spending a sort of a proportion of time in the staff room, but it is something, I suppose, that could be a reasonable adjustment for us, in that we don't, that people are kind to us if we aren't always in the staff room and aren't always appearing as social as maybe they would like us to be, and it's just because we do need that headspace.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely.
Shabs, that's something to think about as well for your students, and them going forward, that balance of, I suppose, getting it right early on in their career, that balance.
That's right. I mean, we've talked about this from a number of different through a number of different lenses. You know, the social aspect of teaching can be it can be demanding, it can be in conflict with you know, whether you have a disability, whether you are from a different culture, you know, so it very much, we need to start looking at everybody through multiple lenses, because, well, through the lens of that person. And it goes back to what everyone was saying, you know, when we were talking before about tips for ADHD children in your class, and, you know, everybody is saying get to know them, and I think it's the same for staff. You know, you've got to get to know them, but until we feel safe enough, and I say that for, you know, any kind of marginalized group, until we feel safe enough to be able to say, look, this is me, and I'm a triple threat. I mean, I absolutely love that. I think that is fantastic. I'm going to tell my son this, you know, that, you tell them that this is, you know, this is you, and you are proud to be that. Until we can feel safe, I think it's very hard for a lot of people to say, look, actually, I'm autistic, or, you know, I need to have this social space afterwards, away from everybody doing that kind of thing. Or, you know, yes, I can do it on one Friday night, but then I'm not going to do it every Friday, or it might be one off. It doesn't mean that I've stopped being a social person, or that there's something wrong. It's just that this is what I need. So I think it is. It's something that could be part of a reasonable adjustment, but really it should be part and parcel of finding out who your staff are, you know, in terms of leadership teams and head teachers, and making sure that they have everything that they need. You know, I don't think that's unreasonable to ask at all.
No, not at all. I think with that kind of thing, it is mainly just understanding that if I say no to a social event, it's not because I don't like you or anything. It's just I need that time to decompress. Perhaps another time when I've got more energy.
Absolutely. It's interesting what you were saying about, you know, the weekend, and it's funny because I say I'm late to the party. Late to the party, God knows how many, triple, quadruple threat. And I feel like when I left my headship and I left, you know, suffering from incredible anxiety, I almost had a 3-year social hangover, because I'd had to mask for so long, you know, of keeping it up and keeping it up and keeping it up. And like, so when you get home, and for a lot of people, there's family, there's home life, and you can't stop then. So the only time you can actually stop holding yourself together is the minute you get into bed. And then it's kind of like, oh, great. 5-6 hours later, I've got to be up and doing it again. So, you know, it is important that we look after each other.
I think that's something that so many people seem to resonate with. You'll see the comments that are in the sidebar, but obviously there's comments on Twitter as well. So Sarah, I know you'll have been tagged in those. Thank you so much for speaking with us this evening. I always really appreciate your insights, and Sarah's got some really wonderful threads on these topics on Twitter as well. So if you follow a lot of the DisabilityEd links from tonight, then you'll be able to see her Twitter. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
So we're just about to introduce our next speaker, Ian. If you're following us on YouTube, then please add some comments in the sidebar, flash them up on Twitter. She'll probably not enjoy that I've said this, but my friend Cara, who's all the way over in Illinois in the USA, is watching tonight, and she's sent me a message that said, I wish I'd had a diagnosis and teachers like this, and I might have been okay. What you're all doing is so wonderful. So thank you, Cara, all the way over in the US. So let's introduce Ian. So,
hello.
Thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's my pleasure.
Slightly later than Build, so please, it's just everybody's been so wonderful, and we've enjoyed having a chat with them. And Ian, I'm sure you're going to be exactly the same. Ian's going to talk to us a bit about dyslexia. So
no pressure. I was smiling just before I came on, actually, that my timekeeping is shocking. So this 5 minutes late thing is great.
It is a neurodivergent event. It is a neurodivergent event. We're not known for our great timekeeping, let's face it. So, so I'm glad that you're okay with that. I'll leave you to it, though.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And I suppose how I thought I would structure this really is just give you a little bit of an introduction into who I am now and what I do for a living, and then rewind all the way back to my childhood and just sort of look at the journey to here really, and how my dyslexia has impacted me, and how I believe my dyslexia has actually supported me to get where I am today really. So I'm currently an executive principal for overseeing a group of special schools. So I've got 5 schools now that I'm responsible for. My journey started back in, obviously like everyone's, back in primary school. My 3 main memories of primary school are very short. One is nosebleeds, the other is times tables because they were so painful, and the other was one day we had a lightning strike in the playground. So that sums up my primary education. And secondary didn't really go much better. I hated school. I despised being there. I couldn't understand why it was that I found it so difficult. I had long periods of disengagement. I couldn't see the point. There was no point in being in the classroom because everything was so difficult. So I would choose other things to do rather than be in the classroom. And some of those, maybe the school didn't agree with it under their disciplinary policy. Some of them they didn't mind so much. But I had to find other means of surviving school. So it wasn't a pleasant experience. I was diagnosed with dyslexia probably in the second term of year 10. So I'd really missed my opportunity of GCSEs by the point that a diagnosis allowed an understanding of what it was that I was finding difficult. And I was excluded from school probably about a term after that. So before the end of year 10, I wasn't excluded. I was just suggested that I might want to leave. So I did my final year of school in a new school, built really good relationships in that school, but the expectation academically was low, and that I came in with a diagnosis of dyslexia, which was helpful because people actually thought about how they communicated with me and what they were asking me to do in lessons. And even though it was a long time ago, as you may be able to tell from the grey hair, people were compassionate, even if they didn't understand how they could teach someone with dyslexia. But that compassion and the ability to build strong relationships with the staff members that were working with me was really, really helpful, and enabled me to get through that final year of school really without causing too much more trauma. Not that I was traumatized by school. I just didn't enjoy it and wanted to get out, and was doing other things that were much more fun. I think my record for playing truant was 12 weeks. I did a 12-week stint. I just didn't go to school because what was the point? And I think people found it a bit easier if I wasn't there, so they didn't really chase me up. So that's the context to which I'm now leading schools, and I've been a teacher, and I've been a head teacher, and I'm now overseeing and line managing head teachers. So there's a bit of a leap, which I'll try and just skip you through. So I left school and joined the Navy. I literally ran away to sea, which was great, although my mum did sign the paperwork, so technically it wasn't running away. But that was a phenomenal opportunity for me, because even though that first year in the Navy was, a lot of it was classroom based, lots of physical stuff as you'd expect, but I actually found a love of learning, because people were delivering very practical things, even though in a classroom setting, but it was meaningful. I knew why I was learning it, and I knew how I was going to implement that learning afterwards. And it was a very short time span between me learning it and then having to do it. So I believe that connection really plays into my presentation of dyslexia, is that it's got to be meaningful and it's got to be delivered in a relatively practical way. And I've got to know that I'm going to need to use it, because that really drives my need to understand them, and a passion within me for learning. So I sort of used that very much. I planned to spend 5 years in the Navy and then come out, and I was determined to go to university. I don't know why. And after my experience of school, I would have thought that would be the last thing, but I was just determined that I was going to go to university and get a degree. I enjoyed the Navy a bit too much, so I stayed for another 5 years. So I did 10 years in total, and then left, clearly with no GCSEs. For my maths GCSE, I was actually in the pub having a pint at the end of the road, watching my mates go into their year 11 GCSEs, which will give you an indication of how much engagement I felt towards my maths. But I went and signed myself up for an access course when I left the Navy. My first assignment in my access course, so the access course was equivalent to 3 A levels. My first psychology assignment I submitted. I loved it. I loved researching the title. I loved writing the assignment. I was able to write using a computer, which wasn't available to me when I was at school. That's probably more of an age thing as well. So my spelling, my structures, I could edit, I could delete, I could restructure sentences. And my first comment on that first assignment was that I must have plagiarized it, because actually it was too good for someone who's just come out of the Navy and come onto an access course, which was a good confidence booster. But it wasn't plagiarized. It was just I enjoyed what I was doing, and I'd learned those skills of being able to engage and work through a topic that I was interested in and then represent it. So I did my access course, did a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, which I absolutely adored. Like some of the previous speakers, being able to actually plan a lot of my executive functioning issues are around those minute organizational things, putting things in order, doing things in the right order, and getting somewhere on time. So none of my assignments were completed more than an hour before the deadline. I often had to stay up all night the night before assignments were due in to finish them, because actually I have a complete block of any motivation before actually the deadline's looming, and I think a lot of people find that. But got through, got a good grade. I got a 2-1, and then thought, right, what do I actually want to do? I want to work with children. I've got a psychology degree, and I managed to convince them to allow me onto a secondary science teacher training course. In order to be able to sort of go into secondary teaching. That took a lot of debate, because actually they normally like classic sciences like biology, chemistry or physics, but I had to sit down with the dean of the university and express my concern that he'd just awarded me a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology and was blocking me from being able to go on to a secondary teaching course in science. And I think I won the argument, because they let me in, which then I had to do a lot of learning, because I had to learn biology, chemistry and physics in order to be able to get through the course. But that's, again, it was meaningful, and I was able to see why I needed to do it, and I absolutely needed to do it because I needed to be able to pass it on to the children. So that's where my motivation came from, really. I really struggled with my NQT year. I don't think I ever reached out, and I'm not sure anyone really saw. But again, it's that executive functioning, the administrative burden. Being a teacher is phenomenal, particularly in your first few years when you're getting used to classroom management, building relationships with large groups of students, and planning and marking and assessing and being in the right place at the right time and being there on time, which we've already discussed isn't one of my strong points. But the hardest thing I found was that actually I was in a group of people that would sit in a room in between lessons and not particularly talk very positively about children. So my passion was always, right, I'm doing this because I want to work with children. I want to make an impact. I want to ensure that I can do maybe a tiny thing for a young person within their school life, which I may have really wished for when I was at school. So to be amongst people that were so quick to blame the children for their challenges, or to talk about them in less than positive light, I became a little bit disillusioned. So I spent a year and a half in that school, completed my NQT year, and then sort of submitted to another year. But I had an opportunity in a tiny little special school for children with social, emotional, mental health difficulties. And clearly I decided I'd transferred my Navy pension out and into my teacher's pension scheme. I was settled. There's no way I was going to leave the job I was in, but I was too polite and went for a look around and just fell in love with it, because it was all about the kids. It was all about getting alongside children who were finding it really, really difficult, and finding a way to access and build relationships with them onto which you could then build their education. So clearly I just left my job and went and did it. And within probably 6 months of that setup, because of a few changes within that, I was in the senior management team, and the head teacher left, and the obvious thing for me was, within my first 2 years of teaching, I was running a school. And I think that's where my childhood really kicked in, because I spent an awful lot of time at school. That my formative years were in a room where I probably didn't really know what was going on. So to me, stepping into that job was very much like that. It was, I don't really know what's going on, but I'll find out. So it's putting yourself into a situation where actually you're not qualified, you're not experienced, but you're going to do a good job because you care about the children. And if you put them first, the rest of it you can learn on the job, which is what I did. So I was, I think at the time, the youngest head teacher in Hampshire. I'd only been in the teaching profession 2 years, and I was learning every day how to my leadership was already there, because I had developed and been promoted in the Navy. So leading people was okay. Running a school was a whole new concept. So having to learn really quickly and build those skills was a phenomenal learning curve. And lots of mistakes were made, and everybody supported and picked up and moved on. And I went on from there, from strength to strength, really, of being in leadership positions, but holding the children as close to me as possible in order to be able to make that difference. And in fact, one of the head teachers in one of my schools only last week did raise the point with me to say, why do you never communicate with me the same as I see you communicating when you go and sit next to a child out in the mud when they're having a really difficult time? And that was a really, it's a fantastic compliment that actually someone has noticed, and that those skills with the young people and the children have been recognised. But also it's an eye-opener for me, because sometimes I do forget that the grown-ups are as important as the children, and that is definitely something that I need to keep at the front of my mind, is that actually we're all a team here and we need to work forward. But I suppose where my challenges come, I've already mentioned my executive functioning. One of the great things about being in leadership is that you can build a team around you of people who have the skills that you don't. So I will always ensure that I've got team members around me that can pick up the bits that I can't do. I can't proofread my own writing. I'm phenomenal at picking faults or mistakes or errors within other people's writing, but there's some block. There's just a solid block. If I've written something, I can't go back into it and find errors. I can't spell bear in any of its forms. I don't even know which bear to use most of the time. So just simple things. I've just got used to the fact, and I'm very open with people to say, it's not my strength. I don't do that. I can't do it. So can someone help me out here, and bring people in that are able to pick that up? Names. I know people, and I can see someone I've only met once, and I will recognise them and know exactly where I know them from, but I won't know their name. So people I work with, and anyone that I've ever worked with will be able to tell you that they will fill in names for me. So I'll get as far as getting to the point of needing the name, and people step in for me now and just say the name because my description has got them to the point of understanding who I'm talking about. But I think that's the challenges, and I'm really open about those, and I'm really open from the outset to say, look, I'm not going to be able to do that, and don't expect me to remember a name. My short-term memory is a bit shoddy, but please, I will find a way around it. Lots of my things now in an electronic world are connected, so my calendar is buzzing on my wrist and on my phone and on my computer to make sure I try and get to places on time, and with the instructions and the links that I need to be able to deliver that. But what I wanted to finish on really was strengths, and I believe a lot of these are directly from my dyslexia. Critical thinking. I went for a job for a senior manager post, and I had to do a psychometric test before the interview, and I didn't really know what it was. It was about a 16-page document, but I turned up on the day of the interview, and the psychologist came and asked me to do it again because I'd obviously made some errors on it because the scores were a bit out. So I did it again on the day, and they assessed it, and I had a meeting with the psychologist, and I'd come out with exactly the same score. But my critical thinking score was in the top 0.2% of senior executives in the country. And that's not down to me, my background, my parents. That I think that is just a strength that's come through my dyslexia. That's just something that compensates for some of the other challenges I have that I've probably developed because of those challenges, because I've needed to think differently. My maths is good, but my route to my answer is nowhere near the same as anyone else in the room. So it's very much about the skills that I've developed in order to compensate for what I can't do are the things that have turned out to be things that other people can't do. So it's very, very important when looking at the young people or your colleagues or people around you that is identifying those strengths, because some of them are exceptional, even though I can't spell bear. I can go out into a room of people and engage and make really strong, meaningful relationships quickly, and I can remember and carry those relationships on for a long time, which is really useful in my role now. But don't ask me to write to them. Certainly don't handwrite to them, because actually that's not going to be something that I'm going to be particularly strong at. So I suppose that what I wanted to communicate really is that there are difficulties. Everybody's experienced difficulties, neurotypical or not. I suppose teenage years and formative years are really difficult for people, but I think it's to look for those opportunities and identify the strengths, and then look for working with young people and colleagues about, great, you can't do that, or you're not very good at that. Is there something I can do to support you to develop that? Or can we just fill that gap for you? Because actually, do you need to do it? Is it critical to your job, or is it critical to this lesson that you need to be able to write there? Because if it isn't, let's work around it and move on, and let's rely on the strengths and try and fill those gaps on the way through. That's pretty much it from me. I would really appreciate if there are any questions or any comments, just to go through and see what's any thoughts.
Yeah, Ian, thank you so much. I think I was nodding along to so much of what you said, because it also touched on a lot of things that other people have already said this evening, not only just about dyslexia and the things that you were saying about your own writing and needing and the proofreading, but also earlier on we'd heard talk about what it's like listening to other teachers maybe talk about children as well. And I think that for me, one of the things I really enjoyed hearing is that you've been a head teacher, but then you've gone on and you are a leader within education. And that's really important for other dyslexic teachers to be able to hear that that's something that is achievable. It's really important, I think, for teaching students to hear, but I think it's really also very important for the pupils that you work with to hear that. We sometimes talk about the genius narrative in neurodiversity, where it's Einstein and all of these people who are who are people to aspire towards. But for me, the most meaningful people for children to see who are dyslexic are their head teacher, or and for them to think, this person who's got this authority in our school and they're just like me, they have the same challenges and the same strengths as me, so that's something I can achieve. So
some of the most powerful conversations I've had are, I got excluded from school too. Now let's have a conversation about the difficulty you're having at the moment, because actually I'm not fazed by that. Let's just talk about, are you okay? Why did it happen? Let's have a look at unpicking that with you, and let's see how we can move on, because actually I'm not worried that you've just knocked a table over. It's about, how do we get you back into the lesson, and how can you settle back in and not be embarrassed or feel shame. It happens. Let's move on.
Definitely, and Ruth herself said there as well about doing an access course and those sort of different pathways. Ruth actually on Saturday is speaking on the My Representation Matters show on Teacher Hub Radio, and she talks a little bit about what you've just said as well, about the different pathways. And you being in secondary, that will be really important for a lot of your older students who maybe they aren't quite going to university straight away, and them knowing that they can go and do something different and then come back and go to university. So that must be a really good connection for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There would have been no point in me going to university from school, even going to college from school. I was done with education at that point. I needed to go away and then come back. I think had I have tried to go into another education setting at 16, it would have probably put me off for life. So it is a really important point that sometimes you need to break that chain in order to find a love of learning. Otherwise it gets beaten out of you, I think, metaphorically, obviously.
Of course.
I think it's a really important point, isn't it? And I think that actually I know that tonight we're talking about diverse educators, but as diverse educators, we need to be honest about this, and we need to say this so that actually the kids that we're teaching, they aren't kind of, beaten into it, if sort of to use what you just said there, and that they actually have some opportunities for breaks, because aside from getting diagnosed or understanding that you have a condition, there are lots of children out there who won't have been diagnosed and who are struggling because they are different. And for us as educators to acknowledge that and to have these breaks so that there isn't just one pathway, and you're not seen as failing by taking a different one. I think, clearly there is this thread, isn't there? I mean, I left school at 16. I was a teenage mum. There's so many things because people did not recognise things that were happening to me. And it's just great to be able to stand up and say, that's fine, and look where I am, a head teacher, I'm a lecturer, I'm a whatever. It doesn't stop you, so it's great to hear that.
And in actual fact, I really appreciate the teachers who work in my schools who have been out of school. What I think one of the risks is lots of teachers never left school. Yes. And I think some of that life experience that you get by having that break really, really helps in engaging with kids and preparing them for their future, particularly the ones that aren't going to follow that path, because actually it's not for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is so important, even just listening to everyone speak tonight, it is so important to have diversity within your staff team and within your leadership team, because there is diversity within the children in the school, and it's important to have people who understand what the children are like, understand that there's different aspects to life, and that going straight from school to school isn't always ideal. You need to have a bit of a sort of a bit of a pragmatic sense of the way that the world works, and maybe the different pathways to support their future. Thank you so much for coming and speaking tonight, Ian. It was really delighted that you were able to, and not just as a dyslexic teacher, but with all of your leadership experience as well. And I think I do really mean when I say that will be very comforting to a lot of us out there that are dyslexic, to think that is something that is achievable for us. So thank you very much for this evening.
Absolutely. No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. See you soon. So next up we have the wonderful Lena Carter, who's joining us as well from the west of Scotland in Argyll and Bute, aren't you, Lena?
That's right, yeah.
All the way from over there. Many of you may know Lena through the Women Ed movement, certainly if you're in Women Ed Scotland, and also Lena talks a lot about well-being, and she's involved in a lot of different well-being work in education. So really looking forward to hearing about her experiences as a teacher and also leader with ADHD.
Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me. I've been sitting here for the last while thinking, well, they've said it all, so you don't really need me. So I just, there was so much there. I started writing things down, you know, things that were resonating with me, but I'll just kind of say some things. I haven't planned it hugely. I tend to like to work from a script, but actually I thought tonight maybe not to do that, because I think one of the things that I talk about a lot is being authentic. And I think quite often I rely on a script because it's the safe thing to do, and it is my words and it is my thoughts, but I think that means that sometimes people don't see the real me. So I am, yes, I'm Lena Carter. I'm also Lena Bellina because most people know me from Twitter. I've done a lot on Twitter. I write a blog. I have been teaching for a long time. I trained in 1992, and I trained as a modern languages teacher, but then after I'd finished that, I'm still a modern language teacher. I was teaching French today, but I also moved almost exclusively into teaching drama for a long time. I then moved into middle leadership. I then moved to the Outer Hebrides when my children were little. So we went and did the whole island thing, which was fantastic. And that meant moving from England to Scotland. So a whole change of system. I suppose my career kind of slowed down a little bit. And I had visions then of going and doing something completely different. I trained as a drama therapist as well. And I was going to be a drama therapist. And then I was going to set up my own business. And then I just got back into supply teaching and then became a principal teacher again, which is like head of department. And then I think teaching is my vocation. So then I kind of thought, well, actually, I want to try and do more. So I then started applying for deputy headships. We then moved back to the mainland, became a deputy. And I would really like to be a head teacher. I make no bones about that, because I would love to run a school that's truly inclusive, truly nurturing, truly trauma informed. And I'm a secondary teacher. And I think that on the whole, we do really well in our primary schools with nurture and with inclusion. I think secondary schools are a challenge. And I just adore the person that earlier, sorry, names have gone, but working with teenagers is just the best job in the world. They are just the most amazing things. What else? So I've recently, I then did my into headship qualification, which is the Scottish qualification for headship. Did really well at that. And then I am actually head of secondary teaching and learning in a joint campus. So that's my current post. But then I went out on secondment for 2 years and worked with care experienced children and young people, which was just brilliant. I absolutely adored it. And I just loved the challenge of that, but it wasn't teaching and it wasn't working in a school. And it started to kind of, I didn't thrive as much in that. And I thought, no, I need to get back to school. I'd been on secondment before as well. I did a year and a half in the inclusion team. So I've kind of got a life full of inclusion. And, when I did into headship, one thing you do is you look at your values as a leader. And, I've sort of said, if I'm going to run a school, this is kind of how I'd like it to be. This would be my values, my vision. So that it was, everyone must be willing to self-reflect and learn, the adults and the children. We don't shout at others. We all get things wrong and need to be able to apologize when we do. We're all human, and being in a position of authority does not mean you are better than anyone else. Everyone needs to take time to see the reality of a situation and not make a decision based on half-truths or judgments or prejudice or stereotypes. And everyone is worthy of love. And, you know, I think that last one, I talk a lot about, you know, when we're working with those children who we maybe feel, you know, hard to love, are hard to love. I just say, imagine it's someone, imagine it's a niece, imagine it's a nephew, imagine it's your child, you know, and I think there's something about needing to do that. Imagine every child as though they could be ours. And I think working with care experienced children, you know, that idea of corporate parenting, that's what it's about. And so I'm still determined to, if I can, become a head teacher and run a school with those values at the heart. I think I've always taught in that way. I think my classroom, you know, I don't think I ever consciously, back in 1992, when I was struggling with groups of Year 9 kids in Sheen School in London and not doing a great job probably, I don't think I had those as my values in my head, but I think I've always been values driven, and I think that's probably part of, you know, maybe being neurodiverse. I don't know, because, you know, I'm teaching RE at the moment. That's another story, but I'm teaching RE and we've been doing a load of stuff on values and making decisions and right and wrong. I've always been very values driven. You know, I was that kid that was just middle-aged before my time. But that's not to say, I mean, I went on to then be very different to that later on. But I think I've always had that strong sense of values, and I don't know whether, you know, I look at other people and think, well, why aren't they all like that? So maybe that is something different about me. But then I think, well, that's what we teach children about. So I think, you know, those fundamental values, those fundamental qualities of being human, of being kind, of loving, of, you know, these are the things that drive me. And I think somebody mentioned earlier that kids are just amazing. And I think, you know, we're working with potential. You know, I can't remember who said that idea of, you know, children are the messages we send into the future, so let's make them good ones. That's not my quote, by the way. Someone really wise said that. You know, I think that's why I'm in teaching, because I believe every child has that huge potential to love and be good and be brilliant and be amazing. And I mean every child, and I've always felt that. So that's kind of me as an educator. So underneath all of that, you know, so I've struggled. I've struggled with mental health. So I write a lot about well-being. I've been authentic. I've been all this stuff. I write, you know, so I wrote a book called The Story of Myself, which was like this is me. I've written my book. This is my journey. Because it was about that. Well, why do I always feel this kind of something wrong? Why do I get upset such a lot? Why is it such a struggle? Why is my life such a struggle underneath? You know, and that metaphor of the swan, there's me paddling along, glamorous and wonderful, and then underneath it's just this panic. And so I wrote this book and I put it down to a childhood trauma, and I've talked about this publicly. I was abused as a child, and I, you know, thought it was that. I had EMDR, I've had therapy, I've been therapized till I was blue in the face, come out of that, great, written the book, put the book to one side. And then a very, very good friend of mine who's a psychologist, she's the one who'd said, try EMDR. And then things were still hard, and things were getting harder. And I don't know whether that was perimenopausal, because I'm 51. So then things are still hard, and I'm like, oh, and then also I'm in the tricky place at work. And I think, you know, looking on it, I'm not sure what that's about. I've never in a place of work before felt that I wasn't good, or no, I've always thought I'm not good, but I kind of had never felt it like I have recently. So I really started to doubt myself about my abilities, about my quality. So I'd like be speaking at events, I'd be doing all this stuff, but underneath I'd be like, oh no, I don't feel like that, I feel rubbish. And so then my wonderful friend, starts messaging me and saying, you know, we talked about ADHD, do you want to look at that again? And I was like, oh. And then and I'd actually thought about, because I obviously know a lot about ADHD, having supported loads of kids with ADHD, and, you know, thought I knew. And then, you know, people had hinted, and I'd even said it to myself, to a friend of mine, you know, about 8 years ago, when she said, oh, my son's been diagnosed. And I was like, oh, I wondered about myself sometimes, because I'm quite hyperactive and whatever. And then she's, you know, and I'm thinking, oh, well, the ADHD, the EMDR hasn't really worked. Maybe it's not just trauma. And then things got really bad. And in about December, you know, I mean, I think my life has been a series of meltdowns, which people haven't seen. The worst one was when I left home and I left home and went to America as an au pair, and just fell apart, developed anorexia, scraped myself kind of back together with the help of my parents, came home from America, went off to Cambridge the following October, massively underweight, and sort of got through all that. So that was a bit of, and then things had been on an even keel, but somehow last December, just a sort of, I think, pandemic, perimenopause, all sorts of things, and I just thought, I can't do it anymore. I actually can't do it anymore. And looking back, without being over dramatic, I'm not sure what that meant. I was ready to walk away, maybe from my job, maybe from my life. I don't know. It was pre-desperate, and then I thought, okay, I'm going to try ADHD. Let's have a look at it. Let's think. And I was like, there's no way. Absolutely, I don't believe it. I don't believe I have got ADHD. But okay. And then I decided to go private. So I went with an organisation where I paid money to go to a private psychiatrist. And then you fill the form in, right? And it asks you the questions, and then you start to think about it all. And I meant to put my timer on, so I didn't think I had anything to say. Obviously, I've got ADHD, so I could talk for Britain. I'm just going to carry on for a bit, and then Laura, please, I can't see anything apart from me looking into this camera. So if you can maybe just interrupt or something.
You're absolutely fine for time, don't worry.
Okay, so I'm just going to read a few bits to you. This is the questionnaire that I had to fill in, right? So it was the most bizarre thing. Part of it is because I don't believe into ADHD. How do I even say that when I know that children have had it? I've supported, but in my heart I was like, yeah, but really, because the thing is, some quite significant adults in my life, I don't think really believed in it. Without saying too much, I think they really believe in it more now because I've said to them, see, it's a real thing and I've got it. But so see, when you've got those adult voices in your head saying, oh, come on. So so this is, do you fail to give close attention to details or make careless mistakes in schoolwork, at work, or with other activities? I remember that when I was at school, I found it incredibly difficult not to make mistakes in things. But because I wanted to be perfect, I just worked really hard to overcome the mistakes. I have memories of several practical activities that went horribly wrong. For example, a cuckoo clock. I tried to make out of a cardboard box and paint and a pottery egg cup created from two. I remember it was like this. It was going to be an egg cup that held the egg like that, and it just didn't work, right? And it was this, I had these beautiful ideas in my head. They just didn't work in practice. My mum used to say I was cat-handed. As an adult, I cannot write a sentence without making a mistake. Christmas cards, nightmare. My kids go, oh, mother, look at your handwriting. My daughter's got the most beautiful handwriting. I used to envy people. Now with a computer, it's brilliant because I hardly ever make mistakes because of spell check, and I proofread and I proofread and I proofread. But all of this is exhausting, remember? The only thing is I can't do dates at all. So if I send out a memo ever, I used to call it date blindness, but I think there's something really wrong that sounds really wrong, doesn't it? But what I mean is if I send out a memo and it says we're going to meet on the 25th of April, 2021, I'll write 2020. And I know I do it, and I still do it, and then it goes, and I'm like, oh no, I've done it again. So there's a thing. Do you have trouble holding your attention on tasks? So, when I was a child, I definitely got hyperfocus, right? And my hyperfocus is quite strange because some people say it's hyperfocus with things that you're really interested in. For me, it could be, but it's also things that are like a problem or a worry or a difficulty, right? So I will get hyper-focused on things until the problem is solved. And that's great for an organization that, needs somebody to solve problems and be creative. It's brilliant. But if your brain's like that all the time, there's always problems. And so, you can end up kind of trying, and, if you want world peace, which is what I want, your life can become, quite difficult because your brain's always doing that thing. So I wake up in the morning, zing, comes the thought, and I'm like, right, up now. And so that's quite difficult. So in terms of hyperfocus as well, I'm not really a reader. I've discovered this. I can't actually read, but I used to make myself read. So I'd go, right, I want to be a clever girl. So we're going to France this summer. I'm going to read 10 novels. And I made myself do it. When I was at university and I did a degree in modern languages at Cambridge University, it was quite a lot of reading. And it was a nightmare. And my friend said to me the other day, yeah, we knew you loathed it. We all loved it. We loved reading the literature, and we could tell it was torture for you. And I was like, I wish you told me at the time that it wasn't like that for you, because when you're like this, you think the whole world is like this, right? So cinemas, I can totally focus, right? If I go to cinema, there's something about films and cinema, I love it. So it's that kind of music's multi-sensory. I remember at university studying, I think it was called Arto, and it was about something called the theatre of cruelty, which is a multi-sensory experience where you bombard people's senses. Stuff like that, I can focus really well. Going clubbing, anything like that, anything. But concentration at other times is difficult. So if I've got that thing in that problem going around in my head and I'm trying to solve it, like world peace, or when I was writing a school timetable, I literally went for 4 months pretty much not switching off until it was finished, and then I had this beautiful timetable. But the problem with that is you find it difficult to hear other people, so it's difficult. However, most of the time I hide all this stuff really well, because most of the time I'm like this. So today we're going to learn about Shakespeare. So I'm good at acting as if all that stuff's not going on, which you can see is a bit of a struggle over 51 years. So I've got loads of this, but it's just fascinating that all this stuff that I filled in this questionnaire, and I was like, oh right, okay, maybe actually, oh yeah, maybe there is some stuff here. So then I had my appointment, and pretty quickly he said, well, actually, it was a really funny thing. I said, oh, my mum and dad don't, I said it now, whoops, mum and dad, sorry. My mum and dad don't really believe in ADHD, so, it's quite tricky, really. And I think that, they kind of they say I was a happy child, and they say there was really nothing wrong, and I was just, I pushed myself and, whatever. And he said, well, it's all a bit of a cliche, isn't it? And I thought, oh, no. He's going to say that I'm talking a cliche and that he doesn't think I've got ADHD, because actually I'm saying all the things that he thinks I want him to hear. And then he went, no, the cliche that parents, they don't want to accept that maybe their child's been unhappy, or that you've had a really difficult life. And, and there is that, isn't there? That if you say to your mum or dad at 51, oh, I've actually been struggling, they don't want to hear it. And they do want to hear it, and they did want to hear it. So the point being then, he just went, yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, I can't really, he said, I think you filled in the questionnaire the best that I've ever seen it be filled in by anybody, the attention to detail. And I was like, brilliant, yes, I've passed that test. Because that's been my whole life, of trying to sort of, be perfect, do everything really well. And that masking is exhausting, because actually, I don't read books. I skim read them. That thing called an abstract is absolutely brilliant. I'm great at blogging, because what I do with my blogs is I record it into my phone, and then I voice text, and then or I can blog, because that's a quick thing and you don't have to think about it for too long or sit still for too long. The hyperactivity stuff, I've literally never been able to sit still. When I had anorexia, I just want to know more about anorexia and ADHD and women, but that hyperactivity, I kept thinking I need to just not feel like that. But having had a diagnosis, I read this stuff and I think, wow, that's ADHD. And I'm still a bit shocked by it, because I feel that, I should have known this. But whereas when I wrote this, and it was like, oh, I found the answer, but I hadn't found the answer. I do think now, with an ADHD diagnosis, that it explains a lot about me. I'm obviously, I'm not somebody, I've been authentic about stuff for a long time. So mental health, I do worry that in a way, it's held me back, because my openness around my mental health, I don't know. I know that some people, I've said this before, I know from the way that some people respond to me, that it does cause people a problem. I think on the whole, they think, you're not trustworthy, or that, something awful might happen. And I just, from my perspective as a line manager, if I interview somebody and they say, I've got this issue, I just think, right, well, how do we work around that? How do we, I love risk assessment. So I say, right, okay, so what would the risk of that be? And they'd say, well, some days I might get in late in the morning because I've got depression and I can't get out of bed. And I'm like, right, okay, so how can we work around that? What could you do? Could you ring me and say on those days, and how's that going to affect, what do we need to have in place? So, and I don't like the thought that I'm like that to other people, but I know that there are people who aren't like that with me. In terms of children, well, I didn't know I had ADHD until December there. So, and I haven't really told anybody that I haven't told any children yet because I haven't needed to. I did hear myself today in class say, can somebody tell me what the time is, please? Because time management is not one of my strengths. And I thought, oh, and I could have said because I've got ADHD, but I didn't because it was a class that I hadn't taught before. What I would love to be a head teacher. And I would love to be able to say, the other thing, sorry, I'm just going to finish in a minute, but I've got this brilliant letter from my psychiatrist, right, when he said to me, I think you need to give this to your employers, because I've been going through a hard time at work. And I think some of it's my fault because of my ADHD. And I think that, no, I don't think it's my fault, sorry. I think it's my ADHD, but I'm reluctant to I'm still at a stage where I'm reluctant to go in and say I need adaptations. Because I fear that it might get used against me. But anyway, I've got this amazing letter, and it's just like, I look at it and it surprises me because I think, why did I not know all of this? So the point being, right, if you think you've got ADHD, please do explore it and please find out really what it is. Because I think a lot of us think we know what it is, but actually it explains a lot of the stuff that's really difficult in life. And I feel this sense of relief now because I know we've used that word weird, and I hate that word, because I felt weird my whole life and I don't want to feel weird. And I would never refer to a student as being weird. And I'm sorry, I'm not being critical of anyone that said that about themselves, but it upsets me because I know it's a word that people have thought about me in the past. Those people that don't like me, those people that don't accept me, it's like they think I'm weird. So I think that, it's just about that. This is me, and I'd really like to carry on being an advocate. But also, sorry, the last thing is I've needed help with this, right? And so I think what I need to say is I'm a role model because I say I need help with this, right? I need people to help me so that I can carry on doing the very good things that I've done, like directing amazing school plays, not amazing because of me, but amazing because of those children. I have that ability to bring out the potential in children in drama and theatre. But I need a bit of help if I'm going to carry on doing that, if I'm not going to burn out, if I'm not going to have to stop. And so I think I'd like to be able to carry on being really good at the things that I'm really good at, but also to be able to say there's some things that I really struggle with and I need some help with. And that's the difficult bit for me. One last thing, I also have a thing called rejection sensitive dysphoria. And that's a proper thing. And that just means you're hypersensitive. And I am hypersensitive. And I worry like mad. And I'll worry like mad after this. Because I'll think, oh no, did I say that? Did I offend someone? See, when I said that thing about weird, oh no, all those people, I'm really sorry. And what I'll probably do is message you all later and go, oh, please, when you said that thing about weird, right? So that's what I do. But that's a thing that goes with ADHD. And I've now got a tablet I can take that really helps with that, right? In fact, I'm hoping if I'm going to take the tablet, I won't feel that kind of sense of panic. But that's amazing. I've been living like that for my whole life, right? That's a thing. And I've got it. And I've got ADHD, and that's quite empowering. And it doesn't mean that I'm any less of a good teacher. I did all that stuff with ADHD. And now the next bit is to kind of work on understanding that bit about how I get help from other people. So that's the end. There we go.
Do you know, Lena, I'm laughing just as you're saying that because you probably will send a message later on about that. And you will be reassured by absolutely everyone that we totally understood what you knew and in the context. But rejection sensitive dysphoria is very, very real for people that have ADHD. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's when it's an extreme form of second guessing yourself, an extreme form of over analysing your every interaction with other people, whereby having a conversation with someone and then going away and replaying it out in your head. Did I say this? Did they take it the right way? Did they take it the wrong way? And if you don't maybe get the feedback from the person immediately that it had been okay, then really worrying about that and kicking yourself when you're down. And it's something that people with ADHD and autistic people have a lot in common, and it's something I suppose that, again, our audience, leaders out there and other teachers who may have us as colleagues should really know that if we are asking them questions, if we are checking in on them about things, it's not that we're being needy and it's not that we're looking for praise, it's just that we have this thing inside of us that, you know, reacts and when we overanalyze ourselves. So even though it was right at the end, it was very good that you brought that up. Thank you for that. And I will tell you, just as I'll tell you later on, when you message that, yes, it was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. You're very insightful as always, and I know that your values that you spoke about right at the beginning, everyone who knows you knows that those values are right throughout all of your practice and all of your teaching. Shabs, that's something as well to think about as well for your teaching students.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've talked about rejection sensitive dysphoria so much with all of my inclusion students, and I'd said to them as well, you know, that things like at the minute with remote learning, when people haven't got cameras on, and that to me it was kind of, well, I don't know if I'm talking utter rubbish because I can't see whether you're looking at me, and then that's just as bad, because I'm thinking, are they pretending to look like they're interested or not? And there's so much, you know. I mean, I've sent you a message, so I'm going to leave it at that. But I think that this thing of finding out is also really important. That's been coming through, hasn't it, with everybody? That why is it that so many of us have not found out until now, you know, until later, even 21, you know, is too late to just find. Well, it's not too late, but what I mean is it's too late in terms of the system has let people down by not, you know, supporting this finding out. You know, it's always too difficult to get a diagnosis, whatever, you know, and you're pushed from one place to another, and nobody just wants to sit down and listen to parents, actually, who know their children, their very young children. They know them, and nobody wants to listen. They just say, no, hang on, you need to be referred, you know, or we might refer you to them. And I just think that's another huge aspect of the system that needs tackling, you know, to get people decent pathways into a diagnosis. So it's not hard, it's not traumatic, because these things are important. It's not about labels, is it? Like we were saying, it's about just understanding. Yeah, that phrase, the leaning into your condition, and you know, absolutely. But yeah, brilliant.
I think one thing, yeah, I mean, I always talk about quality of knowing, and I think, you know, as teachers and as leaders as well, and you mentioned it, you know, Shabs, it's just that thing of like, you need to know the person in front of you, you need to listen to them, you need to look at them, you need to get to know them. And if we give time to do that, you know, we're more likely to kind of notice the things that are difficult. And I think there's this sort of conveyor belt that schools have become of, we don't really get to know people. But just before I finish, sorry, I was going to mention this book, which I was going to write a book, and I thought I don't need to do it, because this is called Better Late Than Never by Emma Mahoney, who is also a teacher. She was a journalist. She's got this amazing career. She was diagnosed late, and it's brilliant. I would absolutely recommend it to anybody that's like us in their 50s, because it's just a brilliant book, and it really is so good. And yeah, so that's just one I would say to get, if anyone's interested.
I haven't read that one, but I'll certainly add it to my reading list. Just before you leave, I think that everybody can echo Vicky's thought. I think we'd all love to see you as a head teacher one day, Lena, and we do know that your school would be run from a place of authenticity and values. So thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So when you get a group of neurodivergent educators together, keeping to a time schedule probably is an unrealistic expectation. We are very on brand for us. We are running late. However, as they say, good things come to those who wait. And I'm delighted that we have Pete Warmby here with us tonight. Many of you will know Pete from Twitter. He posts a lot of really insightful and amazing threads all about being autistic, but also that are really applicable to us as teachers and supporting our autistic students. And also, as an autistic adult, a lot of what Pete says is really good as a reflective tool as well, and to look over and think, yeah, I do that as well. So we are delighted to have you with us this evening, Pete, and we'll let you get to it.
Thank you. Yeah, very happy to be here. Can everyone hear me? Everything's frozen.
I can hear you, and I think everybody can, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, yes, so yeah, thank you very much for inviting me for this. I'm afraid that on my screen everything's frozen, so I'm just kind of sitting there in a state of sort of just still. So it's quite off-putting, but I'll cope. I can live. Yeah, I was going to talk today originally about the the thrills and spills and expectations and life of an autistic teacher, but I've decided, because of events that have happened over the last couple of days, well, last couple of weeks really, that I was going to focus a little bit more on why it is that I'm no longer teaching, because obviously I don't know if any of you follow me on Twitter, but I did stand down from my job about a week and a half ago, so that was quite a big deal, really. So I thought that it's probably perfect opportunity to talk about how that, why that is, and how being diagnosed as autistic at the age of 34, I think I was, how that kind of fed into that. So obviously for 13 years or so, I was teaching relatively happily. I've been at the same school now for nearly 10 years. Well, had been at the same school for nearly 10 years. And in that time period, I'd been head of department, and I was kind of looking at aiming a little bit higher than that. I remember doing the SLT, senior leadership training course, back in about 2016, 2017. But obviously, things have changed an awful lot since then. And I think the autism diagnosis and everything that came along with that is a big reason for that. And I think really and truly, and I feel quite bad about this, because from what I've heard tonight, it's a very kind of celebratory evening, of people kind of talking about the amazing strengths that autistic people and people with ADHD and the neurodiverse community brings to teaching and brings to education. And I definitely don't want to, kind of ruin that by being, Captain Negative or anything. But, given the situation, I've just thought it'd be quite interesting just to talk about, how things probably aren't quite at the level that we'd want them to be yet. And I think from the last talk touched on, I think Lena mentioned about how not wanting to really talk about it very much at school, not wanting to get reasonable adjustments because they might be used against her, for example. I just thought that's the kind of thing that I want to address today a little bit, not in a sort of, oh no, it's all doom and gloom, we've got no hope, but just in a kind of sense of, what can we do? How can we move this forward and actually try and make a positive change to ensure that, subsequent generations of neurodivergent teachers and educators actually have what they need to be able to succeed. So me being me, I disclosed that I was autistic pretty much immediately when I found out. Like literally, I may as well have just kind of, phoned up the school and said, "Oh, guess what I've just done?" So yeah, I'm autistic now. Yeah, do with that what you will. Because I don't tend to hold back. I overshare to an enormous and quite alarming degree, as anyone that follows my Twitter will probably realise. I didn't feel or see that there was any need or requirement to kind of hold back from that, because it was, it's a bit of a cliche these days, but that was my truth. That was me. I've just found out something big about myself. If you find out that you're going to have a child, you tell people. If you find out that you're in love, you tell people. If you find out that you're autistic, you tell everybody immediately. 30,000 people if you can. Looking back, I'm not entirely sure it was the most sensible thing to do. Certainly the way that I went about doing it, with a kind of naivety, a sort of absolute innocent, kind of dancing around meadows saying, yes, yeah, I'm autistic. Oh, yeah. And actually, by the way, I'm depressed as well. And I've got terrible anxiety. And you know what? Sometimes I really hate waiting for the kids to come in. I kind of sit in my classroom freaking out. Sometimes being that open and that honest isn't necessarily the wisest thing you've got to do. You should do. But I think for a lot of autistic people, especially, that's going to be a very tempting thing to do, because that sense of well, this is a fact. How on earth can a fact or a state of being be in any way questionable? How can it possibly be that I can't share this information with others? Because I, for one, for example, I think it's true of a lot of autistic people, I don't think about the politics of things. I don't think about the office politics. It doesn't occur to me that people will gossip. I don't consider myself important enough for anyone to talk about me when I'm not there. It just doesn't happen in my head. I don't see it as a thing, which of course is dangerously naive, because it is a thing, and people do gossip, and people do talk about things, and things spread around and all the rest of it. And I think that that was something that, if I wanted some advice now from a seasoned professional who's gone through the process of disclosing their autism, I think that's the kind of advice I would want. Just be careful, take your time, and be wary of what it is exactly that you disclose. So I told everyone immediately. I filled in my disability form immediately, the big tick, yeah, I'm disabled. And I asked for reasonable adjustments pretty much immediately, without, seemingly without a care in the world. And to my school's great credit, they were fine with all of this. They took it all on board. They even at times suggested, well, what about temperature? Is temperature a problem for you? And I was like, hell yes, temperature is a problem. Like, warmth is a bad thing. Can we not have warmth, please? So they gave me a fan. They bought a fan for me, and I was told that if I wanted to, I could have that fan on me, blowing into my face whenever I wanted to, which I did, throughout January, February, whenever I felt the need, which was always. So they were good. They were helpful. They were eager, I think, to do it properly and to do the right thing. But I don't think, and I mean, correct me if I'm not being fair, but I don't think that schools, organisations, councils, local authorities, whatever the MATs, whatever the organisation happens to be, I don't think they've got the tools to be as helpful as they could be. Because there isn't that sort of innate knowledge and understanding of autism in the general population that you would maybe want there to be. So I think that even if you've got a school who, best will in the world, they want to do everything they can to help you and support you, I think there's still going to be a very high chance that it isn't going to be enough, or that it won't quite work, or that it will be sort of sabotaged by other things that end up going on in the background. So, for example, I've got my new fan. I've got my the best thing was the fact that I no longer had to phone parents. I had to contact them. I wasn't trying to like squirm out of important parts of the job, but I didn't have to ring them. They accepted that my phone phobia was such that ringing parents. Basically, ringing a parent for me was like it'd get to the end of the day. Bye year 11, period 5, and then I would have to sit for probably about half an hour steeling myself just to be able to put the number into my phone. And this would be a phone, this would be a conversation that was nothing, maybe just saying something like, oh, I haven't seen any homework from such and such for a while. Is everything okay? Nothing big, nothing high stakes, nothing scary, but I would sit for half an hour trying to summon up the courage to put the number in. And then, of course, it would ring once and I'd just hang up in a panic and then walk around the classroom 3 or 4 times. That's not sustainable. You can't do that for any reasonable amount of time. So they were quite happy to make me email communication only, which was great. So I had my fan, I had my emails. There was an understanding that, you know, I would probably need more time off in a year than other people, so I got an increase there. You know, all good stuff. None of it bad, none of it negative, none of it unhelpful. Every single bit of that was good. But, and I think this is where the kind of subconscious stuff comes in. It's interesting to note, and I look back on this with a sort of sense of, was that really okay? That very soon after my diagnosis, I stood down from being head of department. And I do hope everyone can hear this, because I'm getting literally no feedback here at all. There's still images of myself, Laura, and Shabnam just kind of sitting there like frozen in time, and that's it. So I might just be talking to the ether, but I'll carry on. So just after my diagnosis came through, I was struggling with anxiety and depression anyway. This was just before the reasonable adjustments took place. You know, it takes a while for those things to get put into place, and I felt that I had to stand down from being head of department. There was no way that I could, carry on doing that job. And I made that decision myself, based on, actually, I am really, really worried that no one can hear me, because my phone is completely frozen.
We can hear you, and you're moving, and other people have said in the chat that we can hear you as well. So I know that you just said that you're frozen, but don't worry, you're not to us.
Good. That's great. It's just my phone playing up. I'll carry on then. So I stood down, and that was a decision I made over a weekend. And as I said, it was before I got my reasonable adjustments. And looking back, I look back at the sort of eagerness, probably isn't the right word, but certainly the sort of way that my school accepted my standing down, the fact that I was, willing to do that. There weren't really many questions asked. It was very much a sort of, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And so I did. And that was that. All of a sudden, you're about £9,000 worse off a year. You've got a bit more time in your rest of your life. But it was a tough moment for me, because up to that point, like a lot of other teachers, I had grand ambitions. I wanted to move up. I wanted to become a senior team member. I wanted to become a head teacher. They were all ambitions that I had at that point, and it just felt like it was all going away. And obviously, yes, it was my choice. I'm not, that is clear. I decided to do it, but it was before the reasonable adjustments were put in place, and there was no kind of argument, if you know what I mean. There was no sort of, oh, are you sure? Sure. Why don't we see if the reasonable adjustments kind of kick in and help things for a little while? See if you get back on your feet. And the more I've thought about this, and I don't hold it against them by any stretch, because obviously, I think they trusted my judgment. But it makes me wonder about, the kind of the ableism that exists, the institutionalized ableism that exists as a kind of undercurrent to everything. That if somebody who's just been diagnosed as neurodivergent in some way comes up and says, I don't think I can hack my job, all of a sudden, when up to that point, they've been doing relatively well. And you just kind of accept that. You just kind of sit back and go, okay, well, fair enough, that makes sense. Well, why does it make sense? Does it make sense because you found out that they're disabled? And if so, what's going on there? What's the kind of narrative there? And I want to, really stress that I'm not kind of hanging blame on my workplace or my colleagues here at all. That wouldn't be fair. But it raises big questions about, what the ultimate effects of disclosing a disability will actually be. Let's face it, if you are comfortable to come out and say that you are disabled, that has connotations, in the real world, unfortunately, that you might not really want to be considered. So I handed my notice in, and that was that. I was no longer head of department. And since then, I've kind of gradually lost my kind of enthusiasm, I suppose, a little bit, and my love of the teaching profession, simply because it felt like I'd had to kind of remove myself from it as a result of my diagnosis, because I couldn't literally couldn't face or couldn't hack being a head of department for any longer. So it's kind of like a natural feeling of, you feel a failure, you feel like you've let yourself down, and that's only really been kind of partially assuaged recently, by the fact that people seem to like hearing me talking and writing about autism online and at conferences and things like that. That helps. It's a bit of a confidence booster. But you do feel, if you've ever had, I'm sure anyone that's ever had to step down from any kind of leadership role, it's a hard thing to do, especially when you stay in the same school, especially when your second in department becomes your boss. There's a kind of emotions that go along with that are quite sort of negative and to do with feeling like you've really let yourself down, you're a bit of a failure. So that kind of feeling continued. Then COVID happened, and it was a case of the whole not being able to go into school due to anxiety because of COVID is only partially related to autism. But obviously now I've walked away from the job entirely. My notice period ends soon, and I will be attempting to kind of make a new life for myself doing this kind of thing and writing books and things like that. But it all boils down back to that moment of me stepping down from leadership. So I think what I'd really want to kind of lead this onto is a talk about, when we disclose that we're autistic, or we disclose that we're ADHD, when we fundamentally disclose that we're disabled, a term that we are often very comfortable with. And we talk about online a great deal. Online, there is no shame in being disabled, not in our bubble, not in our community. We are okay with that. We are proud of it, if anything. We are disabled and we own that. But that's not necessarily what's going on in the rest of the world. So, if you're going to disclose to your bosses that you're disabled, there has to be that kind of proviso, a little bit of a recognition that might not go how you want it to go. And I think what we'd need to do is make sure that for anyone who's in the profession who wants to disclose, who feels that disclosing would be a positive thing for them, which in an ideal world I think would be all of them, we need to make sure there is some kind of means or manner that they can talk that through, and make sure that they go about doing that in the best and most productive way. With anything else, of course, we're teachers. Well, we're teachers. We're in unions. You go to your union to get advice about this kind of thing, but unfortunately, that advice might not be of the best quality when it's something like autism, because again, the knowledge isn't there. So we need to make sure that there is some way or means of autistic teachers, autistic educators, reaching out and saying to people that have been there and done that, people like myself and a lot of the other people that have spoken tonight, how should I go about this to make sure that I minimize, potential negative effects? Because I wouldn't want somebody to, disclose in that kind of giddy sense of innocence and naivety like I did, like quite happy and quite content to do it, only to find then that their career prospects have kind of, crashed and burned. That is something that I think I would like to avoid for as many people as possible. So we need to be sure that, when we talk about disclosing to employers, that we are measured and that we have a little, we have a note of caution that, the world of work, the world of employment is not the same as the world of Twitter that some of us inhabit, maybe a little bit too much, and that we have to expect to find prejudice. And it won't necessarily be kind of blatant open prejudice. In fact, you probably won't find very much of that at all, hopefully. It's very likely to be the kind of prejudice with a smile on its face, the kind of, oh, how can we help, when they care, but when almost, the care itself is cloying to the extent that you start missing out on things, because all of a sudden now you're being kind of, you've been identified as needing extra help. And I mean, we talk about it with the kids all the time, don't we? Students that are identified as SEN for whatever reason, teachers having low expectations of them. It doesn't matter how good at everything they are. If they've got an SEN code next to their name on class charts or on Sims, then there is a real danger, serious, significant danger, that child is going to be under I've lost my words. Not pushed as hard as they might otherwise be. They're going to have they're going to be seen as being maybe not as good as they really are. They're going to be undervalued. This is something that in training sessions as teachers, we talk about quite frequently. How do we make sure that we don't do this? How do we make sure that SEN students make the right amount of progress and that we don't underestimate their abilities? And it's a conversation we should be having. It's very important. But the same is true of teachers. Of neurodivergent teachers. How do we make sure that our autistic staff aren't undervalued, aren't underestimated? That in their willingness to share their diagnosis, that you don't then subconsciously, almost write them off, like, oh well, they've got so many things, that are tricky for them, that maybe senior team just isn't for them. Which is a thought process that I can entirely understand. I can see it happening, and I wouldn't even see it as as any kind of terrible crime. It's understandable, but it's not okay, and it would need to change. So yeah, that's timing wise. I think that's about all I want to say about that. Really, it's it's all about making sure that we don't sabotage ourselves. When we want to be very, very open about who we are and how our brains work. So yeah, like I say, still no movement here, but I'm sure I'll be able to hear you if you've got any questions or things you want to say. Or
you were moving and you were talking, and we could hear you, and it was brilliant. I was about to type in. I'm having this terrible fangirling moment because I absolutely love your Twitter, and I agree with Lena. You're just that. It's just that, but in real life, it's kind of so. Absolutely, man. But it is interesting what you were saying about self-sabotage. That I think I don't know about anybody else, but my entire life I felt that I've been self-sabotaging. Whatever it is, my professional life, my personal life, my relationships with my kids, constantly think, God, what are you doing? You're always bringing you're knocking it down all the time. And I think you've actually answered the question that I was asking before. Why is it that so many of us are not coming forward? And it is because of that. We know that there is going to be this this kind of subconscious prejudice, that if you're going to tell us, that you've got a disability, okay, we're not going to say anything to your face, but we're going to be thinking it. And it's kind of, I have that intersection with race, and then with my gender as well, that okay, we're not going to say anything to your face, but you're brown, and well, we're not really sure that any of this is for you. And you're a woman as well, right? So like now, this is the first time when I moved to Leeds Beckett. This was the first time I've ever acknowledged that I was neurodiverse, and I sent an email to the whole of the School of Education. When my line manager, he said, "Oh, it'd be good if you just send an email to sort of introduce yourself." And I sat there and I thought, should I do it? Should I do it? Should I do it? Yeah, I'm going to do it. And it was a big long email that said, I'm neurodiverse. I haven't yet been diagnosed, but I know that I am. I know that I've got this, this, and this. And it might mean that I completely blank you because I find it really hard. And actually, I sometimes have to set up emails that say, hello, how are you doing? Like you set up a signature, I have that at the top. And it is that, I think this is one of the things that I think it's important to say to everybody. We've got to gather the courage from somewhere to tell people, and actually platforms like this where we have some solidarity as well, really do help, because that you're not the only one, because it doesn't matter whether you're on Twitter or whatever, you still go away and think, yeah, but nobody else is like this, and who's going to listen? So it's great. So I don't think, even though you were saying I don't want to come across being negative, I don't actually think that it is. I think it's probably given a lot of people some strength.
Oh, good. Hope so.
Yeah, you might not be able to see this, Pete, but I'm holding up my fan because I absolutely agree. Warmth, let's ban it. I have my fan at my desk, my computer right here. I've got one
I'm
at
the
my
opposite.
desk. Warmth should be in the group. If we had our own autistic homeland, then we wouldn't have warmth. It would be wonderful. But
well, as far as I thought that's what Scotland was for. From what I've gathered on Twitter, you know, that seems to be the way that it works.
Unfortunately, we do sometimes get a bit of sun, and it's just not something that I had planned for. This I'd not signed up for that when I was born here. But I suppose on a more serious note, it isn't negative to talk about something that's really realistic and about disclosing. And similarly to yourself, I was diagnosed with ADHD first, around about the same time you were diagnosed with autism. We've kind of mirrored each other's paths, but our diagnoses. And I didn't just walk into the staff room one day and just announce to everyone, hey, I've got ADHD, but I did start telling all of my friends almost immediately, my teacher friends, my colleagues. I dropped it into conversation with some other colleagues, and then around about a year later, in 2017, I was in the newspapers, part of the Born to Be ADHD campaign. I was interviewed for the launch of that, and one newspaper used my photograph. Everything else used my name and said that I was in Edinburgh and that I was a teacher, so people would have been able to work that out. But one used my photograph, and a person who is close to me, who is a teacher in another school in another part of Scotland, went into her staff room that day, and one of her colleagues held up the newspaper with my picture in it and pointed at it, because they wanted to embarrass this person, that someone who was close to them was in the newspaper for having ADHD. And this person turned around to their colleague and said, yes, she's actually very insightful and has written lots of blogs on it. You should maybe read them and you might learn something. Which, you know, thankfully was a very witty and supportive comeback. But at that point, because I suppose I am on Twitter, and because if people had Googled my name, not that, like you said, as autistics, we don't always think of people wanting to gossip about us. Like, why would anybody want to learn anything about us? But I suppose on the off chance that someone did Google my name and then found that those articles and things, I have felt that I have to be authentic, and I have to disclose quite quickly, and I have to be open about it, because I don't want someone thinking that they can hold something over me. I don't want someone thinking, oh, I know that she's got ADHD, I know that she's autistic, I've seen it online, but she's not telling us. So she's keeping that private, and I know a secret about her. And I think but that's my reality. I think it's really terrible that that's my reality, that I have to be worried about people wanting to hold something over me. And I think that's something as a profession that that needs to be examined in events like this. Hopefully, it's not just neurodivergent teachers that are looking in. I know from Twitter and things, there's other people and other colleagues, other leaders that are looking in. And I think it's really important for the profession to go back and reflect on about their reactions to people saying they are disabled, using the word disability, and then taking a step back and thinking, oh, this is something we shouldn't talk about, this is uncomfortable. So like you said, though, our colleagues who have not yet disclosed can maybe, I suppose, learn from us and have conversations. And I think I would echo your advice if you are thinking about disclosing. I very much support that. I think the more of us that disclose, the better, but it does need to be handled with care for your own safety, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
But thank you so much. And you didn't get to see the comments that people, because you're frozen, so I will just let you know, Ruth Golding and Lena have both said about that they've loved the fact that this is very much like your Twitter. Lena also said that she's been there and was allowed to step back too easily at one point. She said her choice, not And that's something that probably a lot of other disabled educators out there have experienced, and disabled people, I suppose, in different industries. Ruth's also said a lot of this is understandable, but it's not okay. CJ said, thank you so much. And Ruth has just said just now, you know, we can't change things if we hide it. We need to change the system. And it is probably unfortunate that many of us have had bad experiences, but I think that, you know, you're speaking out on Twitter a lot. It does do a lot for us.
I think, you know, I guess I'm trying to kind of, you know, make the best of it, really. You know, I don't want to just be a victim of it. I want to try and, you know, now I've made my bed, you know, and I can make the most of it now, you know, kind of outside of teaching, looking back in. So, yeah.
But thank you very much. Pete, if you don't follow me, you'll be in the minority. It's Com Aficionado on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a real pleasure, and everybody has been very grateful to hear from you.
No problem at all. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Shabs, I don't know about you, but I've had a really interesting evening. I know we can see each other in the bottom of the screen that the viewers can, and we've been nodding our heads vigorously and smiling at a lot of things. Some of the key points I think I've taken away is that while all of us have had challenges, and maybe challenges in our pathway to get towards education, a lot of us have chosen this career because we really identify with younger people that are like us, and we want to do better and be better for them. And similarly now, I suppose we want to really support other teachers and teaching students that are just like us too.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, you know, it's really important for those like teachers coming into the profession that, you know, we support them, we find out, and it always comes back to this thing of, you know, getting to know your staff and your children. I mean, I talk to my students about this all the time, about this deep culture. You know, don't just look at anything on the surface, whether that's disability, whether it's race, whether it's gender. You know, nobody is part of this homogenous group of, you know, we're all autistics, or all ADHD, or all black, or we're all brown, or we're all women. You know, we're each individuals, and there is no such thing as not having enough time to find out about every single person, you know, that you have an interaction with. It's you know, we deserve to have that for ourselves, and we deserve to give it to people who we meet, you know, and the kids that we meet, and find out about them and what their needs are, instead of separating them out and saying, you know, these are additional needs. It's not about additional needs, it's about everybody's right to, you know, to have somebody understand them. So yeah, that's certainly something I'll be taking back, and I'll be beating on about it with my students.
Oh, thank you so much for joining as well, Shabnam. Thank you to everybody and everyone who's contributed at the side. When this finishes, it starts to download, and the recording will be available on the DisabilityEd YouTube channel, which you can access from the website disabilityed.org. So please do pass it on to your colleagues and school leaders. Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.